ESPN welcomes you to the following presentation of the National Football League.
Let's get the gleam. All right, let's go.
Fires, end zone, Ozzie, touchdown Browns!
Cleveland has a love affair with their Browns. For a generation, the city idolized its heroes and exulted in their victories. But in '95, Cleveland lost its team.
Came down to a simple proposition. I had no choice.
Today, will the new Browns fashion an expansion blueprint with these familiar faces?
Hand off to Allen. Touchdown! Got a man, Brooks, and he caught a touchdown. He made those touchdown! Jason Howard!
South of Cleveland, it's Canton, Ohio. Now the home of the Professional Football Hall of Fame. 3/4 of a century ago, the seeds of the NFL were formed in this great Midwest city. Northeast Ohio has been waiting. It's been 3 years of waiting. But the long wait is rewarded today. The Browns backers, they've made the inside of the Canton Civic Center in Canton, Ohio, on a Tuesday afternoon in February feel like a Sunday in November right off the shores of Lake Erie. The Browns are back. The Hall of Fame tradition gets picked up here again as the expansion draft, the first large chunks of the new Cleveland Browns, take shape here this afternoon. Here's Gene Washington, Director of Football Operations for the National Football League.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Canton Civic Center. The 1999 Cleveland Browns expansion draft is here. The Browns will select 30 to 42 players from a pool of 150 NFL veteran players. The time is here, and the Browns are on the clock.
Are they ready or what? Man, 6 months from today, they play their first game, but we start building the Browns. We welcome you to the expansion draft. Mike Tirico, Ron Jaworski, really honored to be with the man who had the last successful run as a Cleveland Browns head coach, Marty Schottenheimer. So glad you're with us.
Well, I'm delighted to be here.
What we're going to see today, Jaws and Marty, really, we've never seen the likes of in the National Football League at all. If you think about it, here is a franchise with an extraordinary tradition, perhaps among the best in all of pro football, dormant for 3 years. Now we're going to rebuild on that tradition, starting from scratch. With some great people to head up an organization, the Browns are going to select, as you heard, between 30 and 42 players to put the biggest chunk of their roster in place for the '99 season. Ron Jaworski, there are a lot of players out on this expansion list, 150 players. We'll get into all the specifics as we go on, but what do you think they're going to do? Spend a lot of money or save the money for free agency?
Mike, I believe they're going to save the money for free agency, and in this draft, they're going to go for the young guys and the inexpensive guys and build their team for the future in the free agency market. You look at some of the high-priced guys here. Yes, there is a lot of talent. Yes, there are guys that can make an immediate impact on the Cleveland Browns franchise, maybe help them win early, but clearly what this team wants to do is build for the future, build a championship team down the road in the year 2001, 2002. Marty, it could be very tempting to pick some of those guys, but I don't think they will.
You know, Jaws, today represents the very first opportunity for this franchise to acquire players. It's obvious that this group is going to be able to be contributing people in this program. A full 1/3 of the players selected here today will be a part of the 90-man roster that the Browns take to camp. They've got an opportunity today to get some players that I believe can come in, contribute, maybe as many as 8 to 10 starters.
Well, we will watch that and assess the picks as we go along. We are joined by John Clayton, Sal Paolantonio, and Solomon Wilcox. We'll start with Solomon, who's joined by the owner of the new Browns, Al Lerner, and the president and CEO, Carmen Policy. Solomon?
Thank you, Mike. We'll start with you, Mr. Lerner, since you wrote the $530 million check. How excited are you to finally see football returning here to Cleveland after a 3-year absence?
Very, very excited. This is more than I even could dream about. It's extremely gratifying, and I just hope we can live up to our responsibilities.
Carmen Policy, you were a Youngstown native, very close by. How excited are you to see football return here? It has to have a very special personal meaning for you.
Well, I think when you talk about professional football and you talk about the roots, the history, the legend of professional football, automatically you include the Browns in that discussion. And now having the Browns coming back with a brand new stadium, and it's like a dream come true to have myself involved in part of that. And I tell you, I have to keep pinching myself every day when I get up. It's fantastic.
All right, thanks, Carmen Policy. Al Lerner. Now let's send it over to Sal Paolantonio, who's standing outside of the Cleveland Browns war room.
Thanks, Solomon. I'm with Director of Football Operations Dwight Clark, who actually gets to pick the players. And you've got a unique opportunity here, really, to build a team from the ground up. But how much have you thought about the historic opportunity you have to rekindle this franchise?
Well, there's a lot of tradition here in Cleveland and with this organization, so just to be a part of it is amazing. To help build a team from the ground up, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
I could feel the emotion inside you as you heard the dog pound go crazy outside. What were you feeling?
I don't know, my palms are sweaty. It's like playing a game. It's you know, when you can sell out 4,000 tickets to the expansion draft in 20 minutes, that tells you what kind of fans you have.
Thanks a lot, Dwight. It looks like he's got a little pregame jitters, Mike.
Only natural to have adrenaline flowing on this afternoon, Sal. Let's get everyone quickly assessed with what's going to happen here and comfortable with as you see Dwight walk back into the war room where the Browns will be making the picks along with Chris Palmer, the head coach, seated to Dwight's left. You heard the rules. They have two options. Either select between 30 and 42 players or spend 38% of the 1999 NFL salary cap, just under $22 million. The player pool, 150 players, 5 unprotected from each of the 30 NFL teams, with some caveats, including a player who may have been on injured reserve, a player with a decade or more experience, but no kickers or punters are available here. And the other significant rule, once a player is selected from your favorite NFL team, if you're not a Browns fan, they get to protect one more guy and pull him back. And then if a second player is taken, you're not going to lose any more than 2 players in the National Football League expansion draft if you are a fan of the other 30 NFL teams. So a little thumbnail on the rules. There will be more specifics and in-depth things we'll need to cover as our 3 hours in Canton move on. But the first selection for the 1999 Cleveland Browns in the expansion draft is about ready, and we will get to that momentarily. The excitement in this community is so easy to sense. Everywhere you walk, everywhere you talk to people, the dog pound behind me, you can sense these people are ready for this first step in the building.
Pick, the Cleveland Browns take from the Detroit Lions, Jim Pine, center from Virginia Tech.
You want to talk about a difference? Here you are left unprotected by your current NFL team, feeling unwanted, and you come here to the expansion draft and 4,000 people are cheering for an offensive lineman. Usually you only talk about offensive linemen when there's a penalty flag thrown. Instead, he gets the welcome. So Jim Pine, who was an offensive lineman for the Detroit Lions, is now a Cleveland Brown. A starter, Jaws, let's talk about Jim Pine and why make a selection like him to get things going.
Mike, it really is an appropriate pick for the Cleveland Browns. You'll see him right here. He's a slugger. He's a mauler. He'll typify how the Browns want to play. Get after people. Be physical in the trenches. And this is an old lineman that will get it. He's a strong guy. He started 16 games last year for center in Detroit. He started for 3 years in Tampa Bay at the left guard position. He's a swing man. He brings a lot of talent and a lot of leadership. This is really, to me, the kind of guy you want to start to build a franchise around.
And Marty, to you, there is incredible value for a young team, no matter what they do running back-wise, quarterback-wise, to get the offensive line as settled as you can. And you think you can do that in this draft?
Mike, I'm committed that this particular draft gives you the opportunity to do that. Jim Pine is a very good player. There are a number of other players that are going to be available in this particular draft that are going to help this football team win and win in '99.
Jim Pine has a salary cap number of $1.9 million. He was signed as a free agent by the Detroit Lions. He is now a Cleveland Brown after his 1 year in Detroit, and he's standing by with Solomon Wilcox.
Thanks, Mike. Jim, you heard the roar of the crowd here. After being left unprotected by the Detroit Lions, are you really elated that you come here and receive such an ovation?
Yeah, I'm excited. You know, Cleveland's a great place. You know, I'm excited to be here. I wanted to be here. I asked to be unprotected by the Lions because I wanted to get out of there, and I'm excited to be in Cleveland. You know, it's great fans, great people. You know, it's an exciting city. Saw it this whole last night and everything, and the facilities are great. Great coaching staff, Coach Palmer. You know, I'm excited. It's a great opportunity.
Now, last year you played at the center position for the Detroit Lions, but you spent some time in Tampa Bay at the guard position. Which position do you prefer, and have you talked with anyone here in Cleveland? Well, I'm a center at heart. That's what I played in college. I grew up playing. I love to play center. You know, I was fortunate enough to play guard in Tampa, and I can play anywhere. I'm excited to play, and wherever they want me to play, I'll play, but I'd love to play center. All right, thanks, Jim Pine. Now let's go back to you, Mike.
Solomon, thanks. So Detroit has the option to pull back a player, and they do. They pull back Robert Bailey, their cornerback, meaning if the Browns make another selection from Detroit, it could only be Jarris McPhail, Mark Spindler, the defensive lineman, or wide receiver Tommy Boyd. That's a better example instead of going through the complex rules of how the expansion draft works. One other thing that we should note, as you will look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see everything the Browns do today, including the rule updates beneath us, and to the side you will see the unprotected list for all 30 teams going alphabetically, so you can keep updated if you surf in and out who's been taken and who is left in this draft from your favorite NFL team. So we've got you covered either side of the ball. Now, there's one thing we can say about every one of the 150 players on these multitude of lists. They're unprotected for a reason. Why would you think a Jim Pine was left unprotected by Detroit? Offensive linemen who were experienced are at a premium in this league.
Mike, I think he was one of those guys that kind of gave the Detroit Lions a sticker shock. They paid a lot of money for him last season in the free agent market. He didn't perform up to that number. Maybe because he was switched from the guard position to the center position. He didn't play as well as he would have liked to play. The Detroit Lions were not happy with that performance. They left him unprotected. But this is the kind of guy who can play center, guard. And, Coach, you know you want to build a team from the inside out.
Ron, there's no doubt. I think when you start from the interior of your football team, whether it be on offense or defense, you've got the best chance of getting a job done.
So that's where they go with Jim Pine for pick 1. Selection 2 for the Browns has been made. We'll find out who the selection is and which team is pulling players back after losing one. Neil Austrian, the president of the National Football League, is announcing these opening selections.
The second selection by the Cleveland Browns is Herman McCormick from the Dallas Cowboys, defensive tackle from Indiana. The Cowboys have pulled back Clay Shriver, center from Florida State.
So Al Lerner and Carmen Policy playing along with us at home as the Cleveland Browns have taken one offensive lineman and one defensive lineman. Herman McCormick, who like a couple of other players, has been invited to Cleveland, to Canton, because Cleveland knew who they'd be selecting up top. So he gets the greeting, and we'll step aside as the Browns start to build their franchise. More of the Cleveland Browns expansion draft as we continue from Canton.
You ask him.
Come on, ask him.
Don't look at me. It's your phone call.
Bitterman, you need to use my phone.
Oh, call collect. Make sure you dial 1-800-COLLECT, not 0.
Oh, yeah. Save a big penny.
Try a buck or two, Bitterman.
How many times we got to tell you?
Okay. I'll dial 1-800-COLLECT. Which phone should I use?
How about the one in your apartment?
on, Mom.
1-800-COLLECT. Save a buck or two.
Hey, Mr. Science. Ever wonder what a hard-working engine goes through? It gets the high rev, and I drove over the mountain because it was their guts kicked out of it. With abuse like that, you don't want to take chances. This is Quaker State 4x4, a synthetic blend for hard-working engines made by guys with more college degrees than they've had dates. It's been tested. For pure maximum protection, there's nothing better. I wouldn't lie to you. They're not paying me enough. Quaker State, sensible technology. What more do you need to know?
Make great things happen with great white paper.
It's a great day for feeling your pride, and it's a great day for smiling inside. Yes, it's a great day, so throw your arms out wide. A great day for using great white. Oh, it's a great day for making your mark, and it's a great day for working till dark. It's a great day for getting that spark. Yes, it's a great day for using great white.
Great white. Make great things happen.
Well, Cleveland was one of the 4 cities present when the NFL was created. There were the Tigers and the Indians. The Cleveland Rams won the NFL title in the mid-40s. But in 1946, the AAFC, when the Cleveland Browns, Paul Brown's team, was formed, that's where the seeds for the Browns tradition really got started. We welcome you back to our continuing coverage of the rebirth of the Browns, their expansion draft, and keeping you updated on what's happened beneath us in terms of the Browns selections. Dallas did pull back Clay Shiver, their 26-year-old center, after their defensive lineman Hervin McCormick. The first defensive selection was taken by the Cleveland Browns. Jaws, you like this pick. Why?
I love this pick, Mike. You get a defensive lineman that had 5 sacks last year, and you'll see right here the twist coming up the middle, pressure up the middle. This is when you can get 5 sacks out of the expansion draft, you're getting a talented defensive lineman. These guys are not easy to find, and you can see McCormick is a guy that can get pressure on the quarterback up the middle, as well as the 5 sacks last year. He had 22 tackles and 1 fumble recovery. He is a playmaker. When you can find a defensive lineman to make plays, again, as we always talk to Coach Schottenheimer, you start to build that offense and defense from the inside out. A defensive lineman that could make plays, get sacks, cause fumbles is a darn good start.
Marty, there are people at home saying, take Darryl Johnston. Here's a guy who's established in the league. He would fit the personality of the Browns. Why wouldn't the Browns in this situation take a Darryl Johnston type player?
Mike, my feeling would be that any time you take a veteran player like that, you bring him to camp, he goes in as the starter, if you will. That would retard the progress, I think, of any young player that they may have an opportunity to bring into the franchise.
Of course, Darryl Johnston has a high salary cap consideration, and coming off the neck surgery, he came back last year and did start, but certainly Darryl's towards the latter end of his career, and the Cowboys do not pull him back, kind of sensing that, hey, if Cleveland wants to take Darryl Johnston off our hands, although still productive and still a good NFL player, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for the Cowboys. That's how this draft will work. There's always a second story after who the Browns take. It's who is taken back by each NFL team. And through the next few hours, we're going to get you familiar with the major off-season issues, perhaps affecting your NFL team or the teams in your division. Certainly be intriguing to watch. Third pick for the Cleveland Browns.
The third pick for the Cleveland Browns is Scott Rayburg, tackle from the New England Patriots, who played at Central Michigan. The Patriots have pulled back running back Cedric Shaw from Iowa.
Rayburg, one of the players in that top group that the Browns have kind of kept hidden in some secrecy here in the Canton area over the last 24 hours. So for competitive reasons also, so the other teams didn't know who was going to be selected, although people around the league have a good sense of who will be selected where. Now, if you're a good NFL fan, you knew the name Jim Pine, you knew the name Hervin McCormick. Maybe you didn't know Scott Rayburg. Tell us about it.
Mike, he's a mauler, 6'8", 330 pounds, hasn't played a whole lot, but you watch this guy come off the ball, he will get after people. Against Marty's old Chiefs there, you can see the big strength. Not a lot of power, but he's a big guy that gets on top of people and moves them out of the way with his size, creating the seam for the back to run through. And I think what we're seeing play out here is the Cleveland Browns are looking for those interior linemen offensively and defensively. They want to build down in the trenches.
New England pulls back Cedric Shaw. Todd Rucci was out there, an offensive lineman who many thought the Browns might select. He's a guy who could come in and start. They take Rayburg. that low cap number is very important in building a team, isn't it?
I think, Mike, this is what we're seeing right now. When you look at Rayburg, he is a player who doesn't have a real high price tag. He's a big physical guy. Rucci, on the other hand, has a higher price tag. I'm a little surprised, though. Rucci has been a fine player for that football team in New England. Started 44 consecutive games. He's a winning performer as well.
You could have taken Rucci and Pine at $4 million and said, hey, I've got my 2 guards for $19.99, but they choose to build with Rayburg. We should point out Cedric Shaw was the player who was pulled back. Robert Edwards, as you may know, 5 days ago in a league-sanctioned beach rookie football game in Honolulu, had a very massive injury to his knee. Artery damage included in that knee injury. They have just stabilized the injury. He is still in Honolulu being tended to medically, and only when he is stable enough to come back to Massachusetts will the Patriots team doctors get to look at him. But in doing their phone calls, John Clayton, Sal Palantonio, Chris Mortensen, all of our NFL reporters here, you're looking at an injury that will take Robert Edwards out of football in all likelihood for most, if not all, of the 1999 season. So that's why immediately the Patriots think, let's pull back Cedric Shaw, our rookie draft pick from a year ago. The Browns, in their war room, have mapped out their strategy for the most part of where they're going to go, although even though we have a good sense of where they're going with a lot of the picks, there's been constant discussion and some change. Marty, doesn't that show you, I guess, a real comfortable fit with guys who are saying, all right, let's take another look at it through a mock draft and make sure that we're making the right moves by trying to build Chris Palmer's team in the plan that we first looked at?
You know, I think what is very evident here, Mike, is this. The Browns have sat down. They had a plan at the outset. I think Chris's return to the involvement in the process of the draft has maybe gotten them in a position where now they're going to be involved in looking at some of these young players that can be taught. Chris Palmer has a reputation of being an outstanding football coach and an outstanding teacher.
You may know Chris Palmer from his days as most recently the Jacksonville offensive coordinator. But, Ron, he was with Drew Bledsoe with the New England Patriots in terms of tutoring a young quarterback. So whoever ends up being the quarterback is really going to be in a good position.
Mike, no doubt about it. Chris Palmer's been recognized as one of the outstanding quarterback coaches in the National Football League. A guy that could develop young quarterbacks and make them superstars, a la Mark Brunell and Drew Bledsoe up in New England. And we all know the heartbeat of a football team is the quarterback, and whoever comes here to Cleveland is going to get good coaching.
Marty talks about his teaching nature. The teaching, in part, you saw at University of New Haven and Boston University, 2 Division II and 1 AA schools, but he did a very nice job building those programs back in the late 80s as a head coach. The Cincinnati Bengals are the team that has lost a player. And the way the process works is Dwight and company for the Browns say, okay, we're going to take this player. We don't get the announcement of that. But it gives the franchise, in this case the Bengals, 2 minutes to decide who they're going to pull back. So as Cincinnati makes their decision, we will step aside for a moment, tell you who is the newest Cleveland Brown, who is the ex-Cincinnati Bengal, who the Bengals are going to keep, as you take a look at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, just one of the landmarks in a revitalized city.
We sell pool tables part-time, and we don't handle sales and service, but we can get you a good deal if you can find a way to get it delivered. We don't have this particular table in stock, but I think we'll be getting it in 4 to 6.
At Ohio Billiards, we're not part-time, we're a full-time Brunswick pool table dealer. All we do is sell and service pool tables. We offer superior product and competitive pricing. Come in and meet the friendly staff. You can find the very best pool tables, accessories, air hockey, and more without that high pressure. Break into fun at Ohio Billiards of Belden.
I mean, the Akron U that I knew when I was in high school, when I was looking at colleges, it's not the same. And I don't mean to like toot my own horn, but I did do very well in high school. And I could have gone to a number of different places, but I chose Akron. I think if you're looking for one word, the word is visit. Just, I mean, that's what makes the difference. Just come in here and just get a feel for the place. So that's what I've been thinking.
Yeah, that has a little bit of that reality thing going on, right?
Get competitive here at Sports Center.
So Charlie says you're maybe the 50th best heavyweight.
In the world?
In Georgia.
But when there are differences, we keep it in the family.
Oh, yeah, and Steve Levy sits over here. He's the one who called you Puke-a-boom. Hey, Jeff, don't forget your stick.
And keeping it in the family has made our family stronger.
Charlie, come on out and get your whooping. Charlie, come on out. Stand up.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland at the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton. An artifact that's, about 10 days used from the pregame of Super Bowl 33. I think it was Ace Frehley who used that guitar for Kiss, along with Gene Simmons, Peter Criss, and gosh, I forget the other guy. That's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. That's from the Super Bowl pregame show. You see Fawcett Field on the left and the Professional Football Hall of Fame with I-77 running alongside. Let's go to the podium for the 4th Browns selection.
For their 4th pick, the Cleveland Browns take from the Cincinnati Bengals Damon Gibson, a wide receiver from Iowa. And the Bengals pull back Greg Truitt, center from Penn State.
Damon Gibson, the 4th. I think there are 5 or 6 players here. A very young wide receiver who really, I would say, Marty, this is a player that they're looking for more in the special teams area. He's an excellent kick returner.
You know, this player really has every skill you're looking for except height. He's only 5'8". But on the other side of it, his abilities to score touchdowns is already evident. He is an outstanding return specialist. Gives him explosiveness, Mike.
Ron?
Yeah, he's got a quick acceleration off the ball, as you see right here. Good speed. He can accelerate to the ball when it's in the air. They call that game speed. A lot of guys don't run good clock time, but they run well in the game. He is one of those guys. And here's what Marty was talking about. This is an impact player on special teams. This is the kind of guy that can turn the game around for the Cleveland Browns, making plays like this he did for the Cincinnati Bengals. This is the kind of player you like to get in an expansion draft. A guy that could come in early, make plays. He was one of my best values in this expansion draft. Glad to see this pick. This guy will make an immediate impact on the success of the Cleveland Browns.
You talk about your best values, Ron. Do you mean the talented players who have the lowest cap numbers?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a guy that can come in, Mike, make an immediate impact. I'm not talking about a guy that needs to be coaching and being a good football player. Come in, show some playability, some playmaking skills early in his career with a small price tag.
Well, if you're going to take a kick returner, you would think a couple of things. Roel Preston of Green Bay was a Pro Bowler for the Packers, and then you would also think about Desmond Howard, a Cleveland native. Who knows? The Browns may still take those players, but I think when you take Damon Gibson at this point, it says a few things about what you're trying to do building-wise in terms of salary. Are we making too much of the salary cap and youth impact in this draft, Marty?
I don't think so. I think what we're dealing with, as I suggested earlier, I think Coach Palmer and his staff are committed to young players that they can take and develop. And I think what they'll ultimately get out of this is they're going to find some gems.
Now, the reason that some players were taken off the draft list, if you will, from a Cleveland perspective, have a lot to do with salary, age, versatility, productivity. And Gibson could still be a wide receiver you could use in third down situations as a 4th, 5th wide receiver. So he gives you a lot more options than maybe a Desmond Howard would.
Very versatile football player, Mike. And I think one thing we need to bring to the forefront here is character. One thing that when we talked to Chris Palmer and Carmen Policy and Dwight Clark, they talked about the investigation they did on every player that was available. And they looked for character flaws. And if players had character flaws, they were going to shy away from them. They were starting out a new franchise. They did not want to have any problems.
And that's not saying that Preston or Howard or anyone specifically fits into that, but in general, they looked at the cap number that we talked about with Marty, the age of the player, versatility, productivity, character. So many factors went into this in a relatively short period of time. Remember, when Tom Coughlin led the Jacksonville draft, he was on the job 51 weeks beforehand. The other guys here in Cleveland, they were on the job once the ownership sale went through in the early part of the fall. Dwight Clark and company had only about 3 months to prepare. Chris Palmer has only been on the job for less than 30 days. So you put all those factors together and you realize this was a Herculean preparation task for the Cleveland Browns. They've taken 4 players. A 5th will be selected momentarily, and then they'll wait to see who gets pulled back from the other teams. And again, we'll remind you, bottom of the screen, we'll keep you updated on the selections and the minimums. 4 of the NFL minimum between 30 and 42 players, or in money spent. They have to spend about $21.7 million. Already spent $3 million of that. As soon as they achieve one of those minimums, they can say, okay, that's it. We're done using the expansion draft to build this part of our franchise. Neil Austrian for the 5th Browns selection.
For their 5th pick, the Cleveland Browns take from the San Francisco 49ers, Steve Gordon, center from California. The 49ers pull back Chuck Levy, running back from Arizona.
Oh, there is the big dog, John Thompson of the Dog Pound, welcoming Steve Gordon, I think Carmen Policy knows Steve Gordon. Of course he does, from his San Francisco days. It would make sense that if there's going to be a San Francisco selection that doesn't make sense to us, it will make sense to Policy and Dwight Clark, because they knew this franchise very well. I think a 29-year-old center in Steve Gordon.
Yeah, they know something about his ability. They like his toughness, Mike, and that's what this team wants to build. We talk about the old Cleveland Browns tradition. They want to build a football team in that tradition. I think we can see this forming out right now with Pine going early, Ryberg going early, or Rayberg. We've had some confusion with how we say that name. Like a lot of these guys that we're going to have trouble with throughout this draft. But now when you see them taking a center, they're building that interior line. May tell us something. They may want to run the football, Coach.
It looks like a bunch of zone blocking to me. They've got a center, a guard, and a tackle. And clearly their familiarity with Gordon has a lot to do with this particular selection.
Let's look at San Francisco's unprotected player list. They pulled back, as you heard, Chuck Levy, and that's a very versatile player the 49ers will keep in the fold. There's intrigue in Antonio Langham. Like Desmond Howard, his Cleveland roots are obvious. Antonio Langham, Michael Jackson, and Stephon Moore would be the three players who have that, great marquee value. Bring them back to Cleveland. Hometown or ex-Browns, that would be fun. But the decisions made inside that war room can't deal with nostalgia and can't deal with what a great story that would be for the old Brown comes back to Cleveland. Because let's be honest, and we're speaking directly to Browns fans here, nostalgia, feel-good stories are not going to win you one football game. You'd rather have the salary cap room for your team to go out and get a player who's going to be a long-term impact man, as opposed to a guy who comes back to Cleveland. There are salary cap issues to deal with throughout the day, and for that, no one better than our capologist at ESPN, from ESPN, the magazine, John Clayton. John?
Hey, Mike, well, the reason they did not take Antonio Langham is they can pretty much sign him next week because Langham is expected to be cut. The 49ers are $30 million over the cap. Now, they've already reworked deals with Bryant Young, with a couple other players, too, Winford Tubbs and all that. But still, it looks like Marquez Pope's going to be cut. Jamie Brown's going to be cut. And if the more they put a squeeze on the 49ers cap, the Browns can maybe get Roy Barker. They could possibly get Lee Woodall and several other players, maybe even Merton Hanks. So they're squeezing the 49ers for players by not taking Langham.
So, John, we will watch the small print in the newspaper in the transaction column to see if ex-49ers end up coming here as the cap cutting does happen in Northern California. Pick 6 now.
For their 6th pick from the Carolina Panthers, the Browns select Tarek Saleh, linebacker from Wisconsin. The Panthers pull back Corbin Lucina, guard from Augustana.
Former Buffalo Bill is Corbin Lucina, who gets pulled back. So Tarek Saleh comes from one of the most recent expansion teams, and fans in this neck of the woods who are Big Ten fans will remember Tarek Saleh very well. Out of Wisconsin, a linebacker who was on the Panthers roster, Ron.
Yeah, Mike, a good fit for a 3-4 defensive scheme, can get after the quarterback. He is okay in his pass coverage skills. But again, if you got a linebacker that could rush the quarterback, he can make some plays for you. Again, we see now as the game of professional football has evolved, you need to put pressure on the quarterback. Now you have a Hervin McCormick, you have a Tarek Saleh, you have guys that can get in the quarterback's face. He really is the kind of guy that could, we don't want to go out and say impact players, but he's a guy that could make plays, has potential to be an impact football player for the Cleveland Browns.
Probably look for him on the strong side of the Cleveland defense. Coach, when you look back at Jacksonville and Carolina, we're going to show how these teams did their expansion draft 4 years ago under very similar rules. And Carolina now pulling back Tarek Saleh, as we mentioned, with Corbin Lucina pulled back, I should say, as Saleh goes to the Browns. Tony Veland, the former Nebraska quarterback, who's now a safety. Winslow Oliver and Mike Fox still available to be selected by the Browns. But back to the building of the Panthers and the Jaguars. How much do you think the Browns went to school on what the two most recent expansion franchises did?
Mike, I feel certain that they did. As we know, Chris Palmer ended up as a part of the Jacksonville staff, albeit after they ended up down in Jacksonville for a couple of years. But clearly, I think they've done their homework in that regard. I think that what you're seeing is the process of the bleed across from Jacksonville through Chris Palmer to what's going on here today.
Let's look at the breakdown from Carolina and Jacksonville in their expansion draft 4 years ago. And the difference here, compared to 4 years ago, this is non-competitive situation. Jacksonville and Carolina had to try to scheme and game plan, if you will. Well, who's the other guy going to take? Who are they going to select? At the end of the day, the Panthers spent less money, spent more in veteran free agency because they had to sell personal seat licenses and get the people in Carolina hot to the NFL. What happened was, at the end of the day, Jacksonville is probably the model that you would rather follow, considering what's happened in Carolina over the last couple of years.
You know, Mike, what's interesting about that graphic that we just saw was the number of starters that each team got out of this expansion draft. Carolina got 9, Jacksonville 11. That's a lot of starters coming out of what most people think is a thin pool, players that the other teams do not want. So 9 and 11, an average of 10. I guarantee you this, the Browns would love to get 10 starters out of this expansion.
It would be a surprise if they get that many starters out of this pool of talent. When we come back, we have a pick. Oh, we're going to get it right now, actually. The 7th selection for the Cleveland Browns. You see they've spent just under $4 million as they try to get to one of those 2 league-mandated minimums for building this section of the Browns franchise. They'll have 90 players on their roster when they get to training camp.
For their 7th pick from the Miami Dolphins, the Browns take Jeff Buckley, guard from Stanford. The Dolphins pull back Larry Izzo from Rice.
Izzo, a linebacker with great special teams ability. So you see the phones being worked to Miami and here in Cleveland. Ron, tell us about this offensive line.
Now, Jeff Buckley's a guy that has had some playing time. You know, he's got a lot of raw talent. He's one of these guys that are on the come, and you'll see him here protecting Dan Marino at that left guard position. You see the good pass blocking. That is key. And there it gives Dan the ability to throw the ball down the field. You see him once again here giving Marino protection, coming off the ball on the trap play, creating the seam. Jeff Buckley has a lot of raw talent, and he fits that mold of what the Browns want. They want those tough guys here on the running play, just burying the guy and allowing the touchdown to be scored. But he's a tough guy, an aggressive guy, and fits the mold of the kind of guys that the Browns want to have on their roster.
Speaking of great Browns, there is Hall of Famer, the toe, Lou Groza, enshrined in 1974. The old Ohio State guy, the last of the original Browns to retire. His, along with the other 13 busts of Hall of Famers in Cleveland Browns history, on the stage here in Canton this afternoon.
My name is Jim, and I am the beer man, and I'm proud to sell this Coors Light. So please do not call me beer dude. Don't yell beer jockey, barley boy, or suds buddy, and I'll be happy to pour you a frost brewed Coors Light. Stay away from Brew Brother, Captain Cup, and Sir Pour-A-Lot, and you'll get your Rocky Mountain refreshment faster than you can say lager lugger. I am beer man.
Hey, beer stud.
Whenever you call, wherever you call, wherever you're calling from. Now every long-distance call on Sprint is just $0.10 a minute, including calling card calls, even calls to your personal 800 number. So whether you're at home or on your way there, now every minute of every day can be $0.10 well spent. Come live in a world created around you. Call 1-800-PIN-DROP. Sprint. Ahead.
The 1999 SP Awards. It's going to be great.
The 1999 ESPY Awards with host Samuel L. Jackson, performances by Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, Ray Romano, and Fastball. Plus Ben Affleck, Carmen-elect Garth Brooks, Mark McGuire, Tyra Banks, Sammy Sosa, Burt Reynolds, Rebecca Romaine Stamos, Jimmy Smits, Terrell Davis, the Yankees, and more. The greatest night in sports, the 1999 ESPY Awards, live Monday at 7:30 on ESPN. Presented by Pennzoil and General Motors.
Canton, Ohio, where the roots of the National Football League are. The Hall of Fame on a gorgeous afternoon. It's in the 50s as you look at the Goodyear blimp above, the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. It's Ohio-based blimp, the Spirit of Akron, floating overhead. Some of the beautiful views, not only of Cleveland, but the Canton-Akron area. Goodyear's world headquarters in Akron. They are so glad, as everyone is in Northeast Ohio, to have the NFL back in town. I mean, it does not feel like February in Northern Ohio. And Marty, we arrived at the same time, and we were greeted, your return to Cleveland was greeted with Cleveland weather.
I said I was gone for 10 years. I came back and the weather hadn't changed.
And here we end up with a 50-degree beautiful day. And the fans were outside of the Canton Civic Center here today. and they were tailgating. There was a big tailgate party. These fans are so excited, and the excitement will reach another fever pitch exactly 6 months from today on August 9th, when the Browns' first game back in the NFL is the Hall of Fame game at Fawcett Field that you just saw in Canton. They'll play the Dallas Cowboys on ABC's Monday Night Football, August the 9th. I know you're going to forget the date, but I know you'll be around at TV to see those great uniforms and those great helmets back on the field, and both will be essentially the same. Well, Miami just lost a player in the draft, so the next selection will be coming up, pick number 8 overall, as you look at Dwight Clark and Chris Palmer. And I would guess, as we alluded to earlier in that Browns war room, once a player is selected, they're reacting to the pullbacks, and just to make sure that their course is charted for the next selection. Here is number 8 overall.
The 8th pick from the Seattle Seahawks, Jason Kyle, linebacker from Arizona State. The Seahawks pull back Deems May, tight end from North Carolina.
So the selection is Jason Kyle, a long snapper, Marty, right?
An outstanding performer, Mike, in that regard. I think this is evidence now that they are beginning the process of addressing the special teams. This young man, as you can see, has been a top snapper for them. He's a young man that I think has a chance certainly to be a starting player, if you will, by virtue of the fact that he is a long snapper.
There is another player, Marty, on the Seattle roster, and you prepared for the Seahawks twice a year in Kansas City, that you really thought would be a good fit considering his cap number, in Steve Broussard. And you thought one interesting thing in our meetings that you mentioned about Broussard, when you prepared for Seattle, you were always concerned about Steve Broussard. Why?
Well, you know, Mike, he was a very explosive football player, a guy you always had to be concerned about, whether it was as a third down back out of the backfield or as a guy returning kicks. He is very, very explosive. He's a guy that can help any football team create field position, which is obviously very important in what we're trying to do in the National Football League today.
A very good kick returner, Broussard, in his NFL days. He is still available if the Browns choose to go that way, but as we know, they do already have a kick returner in Damon Gibson, who they took from Cincinnati. Now, while we have an opportunity here between picks, it's a good time to look at the Seattle Seahawks and what issues they have coming up into the new season in 1999. And the two headlines are the transition with Mike Holmgren as the new head coach and in charge of football operations, Ron, and Warren Moon, his status, which you think is not as important because you happen to think John Kitna could be their answer for now at quarterback.
Mike, I am a John Kitna fan. I've had the opportunity to study John Kitna in action on the field. I've had an opportunity to watch him live and in person on the sideline. He has a lot of talent. He reminds me a lot of Brett Favre. Maybe not the throwing skills with Brett Favre, but the competitiveness, the ability to make plays, the ability to lead and motivate his football team. And, you know, with Warren Moon out of the way, I think you have to bring a veteran quarterback in still to work with John Kitna. He has the tools, lacks the experience. You put the right people around him, like a Mike Holmgren, an outstanding quarterback coach, a guy that can develop a young quarterback. I think John Kitna could be your quarterback for a long time in Seattle.
Impact of Holmgren in the division you know so well?
Boy, I'll tell you what, it's clearly going to be a determining factor. And when you combine the ability of Mike Holmgren with the dollars of Paul Allen, that Seattle team's going to have to be reckoned with.
And the organization, too, a lot of the infrastructure from Green Bay has come to Seattle to help build the new Seahawks. Well, the Pittsburgh Steelers are the team that has been notified by the Cleveland Browns via the NFL that a player will be selected off their list. So the Steelers are now taking a few moments to make their decision. Who will they pull back and who will be selected? We will find out when we come back to Canton, Ohio. You talk about the Steelers and the Browns in the same sentence. Boy, it has a great ring to it with the Browns back in.
Excuse me, number 8 bus go here. About number 9.
Who are you looking at?
Dry cleaners wouldn't take a check again, eh, Nigel?
Use Visa Check Card. It automatically deducts from your checking account everywhere Visa's accepted, so you can get what you need and get on with life.
Is your dandruff sending the wrong signals? Get Selsun Power. Doctors recommend Selsun Blue #1. So don't send the wrong signals. Get Selsun Power.
These days, everything's faster. Everything. So how come pain relief isn't faster? Introducing Advil Liquid Gels. On tough pain, they're stronger and faster than extra strength Tylenol. New Advil Liquid Gels. Stronger and faster.
Everyone remembers their inspiration. That one person who gave you all the help you needed. Taught you how to learn, how to think for yourself, and how to make the most of what you've got. Everyone remembers their inspiration.
The NFL and Darrell Russell are proud to honor Michelle Eggleton from San Diego, California as the NFL Teacher of the Year.
Steve Francis and the Terps won the battle at Chapel Hill. Now, Okalaja and the Heels want a little payback. A crucial matchup in the ACC. North Carolina, Maryland. Saturday at 4 on ESPN2.
The Dog Pound will be back, but in a new place. The new Cleveland Browns Stadium, a spectacular 73,000-seat stadium, luxury boxes, and the views open there so you can see some of that great new Cleveland skyline, an outstanding facility that the new Browns will call home. It will be ready in August. Some of the seats are starting to be put in over the last few weeks. As you look at the view from above, man, is that going to be great with the opportunity on one side of the stadium to see the lake. Let's get a look at the next Cleveland Browns selection from Pittsburgh.
For their 9th pick from the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Browns select Rod Manuel, defensive end from Oklahoma. And the Steelers pull back Jason Simmons, cornerback from Arizona State.
Rod, they were not booing you. They were booing that you came from the Steelers. This is going to be very interesting because Cleveland will have so many rivals in Cincinnati, in-state, Baltimore because of the Art Modell factor, and Pittsburgh because of the great natural rivalry. Marty, what about Rod Manuel, defensive end?
Well, he is a big physical player. He's a guy that can sit in and anchor for you inside against the running game. I think it's interesting, Mike, that 6 of the 9 selections thus far have been big people, offensive and defensive linemen. I think it's very, very clear that the people in Cleveland have decided to build from the inside out.
Rod Manuel has not seen a lot of action in his first few NFL seasons, but the Browns people feel his football is ahead of him. So Rod Manuel, the latest selection. While we have a moment, here's John Clayton.
Mike, interesting story on this pick because most of the people in the Steeler organization wanted Rod Manuel to stay, but it was a decision by Bill Cowher pretty much exclusively to put him on the list. Oliver Gibson is a free agent who they might lose in the offseason because of free agency, and Manuel's a guy who's a big defensive lineman that I think is going to be able to play for Cleveland, but I think a lot of people in Pittsburgh think they'll be able to play for Cleveland.
So Rod Manuel is the selection for Cleveland from the Pittsburgh Steelers, and as mentioned, the Steelers pull back Jason Simmons, a defensive back. That leaves Will Wolford as one of the players still out there. But Will Wolford has said he retired. I think this would be a point to clear up one of the small rules in this expansion draft. You have 2 players, Will Wolford and Reggie White, who have announced their intention to retire and not come back. The reason they are allowed to be left on the expansion draft list is very simple. Until your paperwork is processed that you are officially retired, you are still considered an NFL player. So these teams have the option of putting these guys on the list. And Cleveland could take Reggie White or Will Wolford and try to talk those guys into not retiring. It would be certainly a risky move because it would have salary cap implications. Manuel, defensive end, like Reggie White, probably the only time those 2 players will ever be mentioned in the same sentence. But here are some defensive ends who are available. And this is a position, Ron, where you have to take a little more serious look at the players and not the cap number because just not a lot of established rush defensive ends in the NFL.
Yeah, no question about that, Mike. And you look at Reggie White, and I can just think back to our conversations on Sunday with the Cleveland Browns, and, you know, they would love to have Reggie White here. And one of the rules that are in place that they cannot talk to any player that's under contract to another team, even though they are on the expansion draft list and can be taken. And the Cleveland Browns really wanted to know, would Reggie want to come to Cleveland? They would love to have him, but they couldn't talk to him to find out. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. They have an interest in Reggie White.
And we should point out, if you haven't been following the nuances during Super Bowl week and everything else, Reggie has said that there's an intriguing possibility to come back to the league, especially for the new head coach in Philadelphia, Ray Rhodes. Neil Smith was on that list. Marty, you had Neil for so long in Kansas City. It's tough because the established guys are also the older guys. They are getting by on guile and knowledge of the league and don't have as much of a future upside as the profile for Cleveland really calls for.
I think that's exactly right. Neil Smith still is a good football player, but it's obvious that that is not the direction that the Browns are heading.
So the Browns make the selection of Rod Manuel, who is a 24-year-old player, and I think of note, gentlemen, the first 9 picks The Browns have taken one player with over $1 million salary cap number. That's Jim Pine, their first pick, and no player in his 30s. Everyone in their 20s. So if that doesn't tell you the direction the Browns are going, at least early on, for this expansion draft, then I don't know what to tell you, to be very honest. The selection number 10 will come up next for the Cleveland Browns. And for Chris Palmer, we mentioned upside and Rod Manuel. His best football is still ahead of him. But Chris Palmer is a teacher, and that was something in the interviews with head coaches, in Brian Billick, who eventually went to Baltimore, and of course Art Shell, the Hall of Famer, who was interviewed here. They wanted to find a teacher, a teacher, a teacher, and this is one of the reasons, because young players are the ones who are going to come into this organization and be established. They are sliding the 10th expansion draft selection onto their board. The pick has been made, and here's Neil Austrian of the NFL with the announcement.
For their 10th pick from the Tennessee Titans, Lenoy Jones, linebacker from Texas Christian. The pullback is George McCullough, defensive back from Baylor.
We thank Neil for making sure we didn't make that mistake, because they are now no longer the Oilers, but in fact the Tennessee Titans, and they lose Lenoy Jones, a player who has not started but is a good special teams performer, Ron.
But Mike, he is very active. He's an athletic player. He's a guy that I know Jeff Fisher really likes. I did a couple of the Tennessee games this year and had a chance to talk to them about him. He's an athletic guy, and you've got a linebacker that's athletic. He can rush the quarterback, exactly what he's doing to Dan Marino here, shooting up the middle, getting in the quarterback's face. Once again, in pass coverage, driving on the tight end, knocking the ball away. Good pass rusher, good in coverage, and now here, good against the run. Lenoy Jones, a guy that they're stripping the ball, making the play, a very heads-up kind of play. Lenoy Jones has the athleticism, the speed, the quickness, the acceleration, and the toughness to make a contribution to the Cleveland Browns.
Youth, good athlete. We say that a lot. Sounds like a lot of players with special teams experience. How important is special teams and building that unit for this organization in the early going?
Mike, consider the way the league is today. Field position becomes so critical, particularly to a football team that's young on the offensive side, which clearly the Browns will be. Anybody that can get involved in creating field position through coverage in the kicking game is going to enhance this team's ability to succeed.
In case you didn't know, that's why that guy won 145 regular season games. Special teams and defense were a Marty Schottenheimer staple, including in his Cleveland days when the dog pound really reached its fervor. The man who led the dog pound is in the Hall of Fame. Well, not right now. Right now he's in the Canton Civic Center with Solomon Wilcott. Solomon?
That's right, Mike. It's one of the original members of the Dog Pound, John Big Dog Thompson. And John, first of all, what have you been doing on Sundays? Cleveland hasn't played a game in 3 years. The Browns have been in hiatus. What have you been doing with yourself?
Just traveling around the whole state and trying to keep everybody going, keep the spirit alive, talk to a lot of different organizations, groups, schools, and definitely staying in touch with my family. I've had a lot of opportunity to spend with the kids. I have twin girls that are 12 years old and very involved with sports, so they've been keeping me busy.
Now, you've mellowed over the years. Here I am, a former Bengal, talking to you in the dog pound amidst a number of dogs here.
Yeah, this is unbelievable, I'll tell you. You know, just to have the Browns coming back, and you know what it was like. We met before when they left, and the town was down a little bit, but it's great. The roller coaster's at the top, and it's about ready to roll.
All right, John. And Mike, as you can see, the dog pound is alive and well. Let's send it back to you.
You're right, Solomon. It is a first. The Philadelphia Eagles unprotected list is up because they are a team that is about to lose a player, but you are seeing a first, an ex-Cincinnati Bengal who is going to come out of the dog pound and live to tell about it. Eagles up there with Big Jeff Graham among the selections who they might lose. We talked about the fans in the Hall of Fame. Big Dog leading the firemen from the Jets, the Hogs, Barrelman from Denver, among the players, or the fans, I should say, one per franchise that has now been put into the National Football League Hall of Fame in Canton. There's the War Room. The Eagles lose a player next.
How many sugars do you want?
Oh, I'll take 2. Hey, look at the little telephone.
Keep your eye on him. He'll be over every day to use it.
That's okay. Just as long as he dials 10-10-321 first.
Isn't 10-10-321 great? You should see how low my phone bill is.
And now it's even better, you know. Saves 50% off calls over 10 minutes.
Right, day or night. So I save big on all my most important calls.
Like when I call my boyfriend in New York.
Right, like when you call your boyfriend in New York. Wait a minute, boyfriend? You got a boyfriend?
Some guys are born romantics.
He's looking at you, kid.
But for the rest of us, there's K Jewelers.
For over 80 years, we've traveled the world, hand-selecting only the best for you, like K's quarter-carat diamond ring and heart pendant in a cherry-finished jewelry box, all just $199.
Here's looking at you, kid.
K Jewelers, for a legendary romance like yours.
Here's my idea. Come talk to my school about technology.
That most distinguished authority in the field of technology, the Idea Box.
Thank you. The future of digital technology is here at Best Buy with digital recordings on camcorders and mini-discs, ultra-thin laptops, and soon HD TV will be the answer to all your...
Excuse me, you're still gonna sell video games, right?
You bet your joystick.
The future of technology at Best Buy. Now that's a great idea.
Mikey, listen to me. This is your broker talking, okay? Hey, Alex, I'll be with you in a minute, okay? All right. Sorry about that. You and me on a golf course tomorrow. What, you didn't three-putt that hole?
Where are you on your broker's speed dial? Look out for #1 with E-Trade, the #1 rated place to invest online. Get free real-time quotes, 10 times more research, all from $14.95. Someday, we'll all invest this way. E-Trade. Check it out for free at etrade.com.
In Cleveland Browns history, one of the great names, old glue fingers, Dante Lavelli, one of the guys in the AAFC days. If you add his 4 years worth of stats from that league, he would be among the best in terms of wide receiver productivity. Lou Groza sitting there, and there is Dante. The Cleveland Browns legacy includes so many players who still live in the area, enjoying this day as the new Browns are built, with expansion pick number 11 next.
For the 11th pick from the Philadelphia Eagles, the Browns select Tim McTire, defensive back from Brigham Young, and the Eagles pull back James Willis, linebacker from Auburn.
We emphasize Tim McTire with a T, not Tim McKyer, the name you might be more familiar with. McTire started a Monday Night Football game for the Eagles this year.
Mike, good quickness, good change of direction, good special teams player, a tough guy. And here's what I love, can blitz off the corner. Not a whole lot of safeties and corners love to do this. Here, McTire off the corner gets the shot on Chris Chandler, using that quickness and athleticism. There, a good hit on Bob Christian, taking on the fullback. And here, the good read of the quarterback by McTire, settling in the center field, reading the quarterback, going for the interception on the ball to Bill Schrader. Good instincts in the secondary, and a guy, once again, we're going to say it again, that can play special teams and has contributed for the Eagles in their nickel situations. And again, you see guys that can make plays on the defensive side of the ball.
And a low cap number and a low age number, too. He's 23, James Willis. A linebacker is pulled back by Philadelphia. Still, Jeff Graham, one of the wide receivers sitting out there. In addition to Freddie Solomon, Irving Fryar is retired. Wide receiver, a position the Eagles will undoubtedly address in free agency. Graham could very well be cut sometime soon. We mentioned the draft and free agency. When you talk about the draft, the collegiate draft in 2 months, the Browns have the #1 selection. The Eagles have the #2 selection, and they are in a very unenviable position because, as an established franchise, they won't have the love affair time that you're accorded when you get a high pick. And, Marty, did you get any sense at all which way the Browns are leaning when you talk about the two elite players, Tim Couch, the quarterback out of Kentucky, and Ricky Williams, the running back out of Texas?
Mike, I really didn't. I think that they are probably still undecided themselves as to which direction they'll go. And I think what we're going to see is them play the thing down to the very end.
Tim Couch with the extraordinary completion percentage, the Southeastern Conference Player of the Year. Ricky Williams, though, 75 total touchdowns, the 6,279 rushing yards, the all-time NCAA Division I runner. And, Ron, the word special player gets used very often by a lot of respected people with Ricky Williams.
Power and quickness, a unique combination. Reminds me a little bit of Terrell Davis. When he gets through that hole, no one catches you. And when he's running, his pads are always going forward. Running behind his pads, not below them. That's what makes a good power runner, and he does have the speed, and neither Cleveland nor Philadelphia will go wrong no matter which player goes to either team.
No rule of thumb that if you're an expansion team, take a quarterback or a running back. Each player is going to get exposed and beat up a little bit.
What do you mean? You always take a quarterback, the heartbeat of a football team. Come on, Mike.
Ron, once again, trying to get the most money possible for quarterbacks, no matter who they are, no matter where they're from. What about Tim Couch as a quarterback?
No question. Superior talent, a guy that could make plays, good arm strength, not the gun that you like to see in a lot of quarterbacks, strength of field leadership, mobility, traits that you now have to have in the NFL. And right here, a beautiful touch. Meet me at the corner, down the chimney, as Sid Gilman would say. That's the touch you don't see in a lot of young quarterbacks. Tim Couch does have the finesse throws.
Tim Couch has made it clear he'd like to play for Chris Palmer, the head coach of the Browns, is with Sal Paolantonio.
Okay, Chris Palmer, come on up here. We've got you. Could you talk a little bit about your first pick in the April draft? They were just talking about Tim Couch versus Ricky Williams. Any thoughts? You're a guy who's developed young quarterbacks wherever you've gone, New England, Jacksonville. Any thoughts about whether you'll go with Tim Couch or Ricky Williams at this point?
Sal, to be honest with you, we've just spent all of our time on this expansion draft and hiring coaches. We have free agency coming up on Friday, so we really haven't started down that road yet. I know that our scouts are in and working on that, but it'll probably be another 2 weeks before we get to that point.
Now, what have you taken thus far this draft? You haven't taken just one player over $1 million, and you've gone obviously inexpensive and young. What's been the outset from your thoughts from this particular draft?
We were looking for players that had upside, and we thought that some of the younger players may not have had enough playing time. We had to go back into preseason and dig some film out, and our scouts have done an excellent job in doing that. And we think we have some players that their future is in front of them.
You've gotten a late start establishing a coaching staff, getting it put together. How difficult has that been for you, and what next will you try to do to try to round out your coaching staff?
We have 2 spots left. Hopefully we have some people coming in at the end of the week to interview, and we think everything will fall into place by the weekend.
Ray Perkins was just hired. What role will he have?
Well, I think Ray Perkins is a guy that's been a head coach twice in this league and an outstanding football coach, and I think he'll add some stability to our staff, having broken a lot of huddles.
Only on the job for 30 days, Mike, and already hit the ground running. He's got players, he's got coaches, and it looks like he's ready to join the dog pound.
Sal, here are his assistant coaches. Bob Slowick's going to be the defensive coordinator. Chris will be his own offensive coordinator. Bob Slowick came over from the Chicago Bears, and Palmer said the first week of the NFL season this year, Jacksonville winning in a come-from-behind fashion, 24-23 at Chicago. The defense coordinated by Bob Slowick, which included Clarence Brooks, the defensive line coach, really made an impression then. And that's one of the reasons he looked to Slowick on the defensive side. There are some of the other coaches, including Jerry Holmes and Dick Portee, coaches at the college level last year, a couple of college coaches to help the teaching process with young players. That's what they're building in the expansion draft. Here's Cleveland's next selection. Here's Neil Austrian, president of the NFL.
For their 12th pick, the Cleveland Browns select Elijah Alexander, a linebacker from the Indianapolis Colts who played at Kansas State. And the Colts have elected not to pull anybody back.
Which is your option in this draft? You can lose 2 people. However, if you decide to leave your whole 5-man list unprotected, the Browns can keep taking and taking and taking. In the case of the Indianapolis Colts, their decision here is that there's nobody on this list who they are dramatically upset if they lose. Hate to be honest, but that's what they're saying when they don't pull anyone back. First the man taken, Elijah Alexander, a little older, a little more expensive, a little more experienced.
But he is a tough, aggressive linebacker. He gets after people. You can see right here, look at him. I covered this game against San Diego earlier this year. He was all over the field, making an interception that we see right there. Good depth in his drop. Then you see him attacking the line of scrimmage, making a play there. This is a guy that is aggressive and makes plays. A sack. The game that I covered, he made 11 tackles, had a fumble recovery, an interception. He was all over the field, and this kind of fits the mold of what the Browns want to do. Here he runs away from O.J. McDuffie. That's a linebacker with outstanding speed. He brings some experience, he brings some athleticism and some playmaking ability, and just enough experience where he can help the young guys.
In that highlight earlier, you saw Bernie Kosar, who in his Dolphins days, of course, the great Browns quarterback, now a special consultant to the Browns, and the fans reacting to Bernie as you see him as he came through the room earlier. He got a great reception as well. One of the Browns' recent greats, and so glad are they here in Cleveland to have him as part of this rebuilding franchise. The Colts leave no one unprotected and take Elijah Alexander, but they still haven't addressed the quarterback position and probably will not as this draft goes on. We'll go back to Elijah Alexander. Is this a starter, Marty, you think, in their plans?
Well, I think that he probably is. I see him as a stack linebacker, a guy that you cover up and protect from in front of him. He also brings, I think, a very important quality to this obviously young football team. He has experience. He may, in fact, end up being a defensive signal caller for them.
So Elijah Alexander, the 12th player selected. Kansas City has had a player selected. The Chiefs are now making the decision. They have a couple of minutes to decide who they will pull back. And we can get some insight into whoever is taken by the Chiefs from Mr. Schottenheimer. He knows this roster better than anyone out there. We'll step aside for a moment, come back, and look at Bernie Kosar during his great Browns days at Municipal Stadium. He led the Browns to some great success as well. Continue with more of the latest selection in the Browns expansion draft of '99 in just a moment.
At John Gosser & Son Jewelers, we are extremely proud of being an official Rolex jeweler. That's why we display this sign so prominently in our store window. It assures you that you're getting an authentic Rolex and Rolex warranty, and that our dedication to excellence meets Rolex's highest standards. When you're ready to invest in a Rolex, please visit us at John Gosser & Son Jewelers, where we proudly display the official Rolex jewelry sign.
Truck driving is an exciting, rewarding career, and at TDDS we made it easier than ever to join the ranks of professional drivers. Our flexible training schedule features weekend and evening classes to help you keep your present job while preparing for a career with a future, a career noted for job security. The jobs are there. TDDS is the training you need. Our large training site operates day and night in all kinds of weather to prepare drivers for the real world of truck driving.
Call 1-800-475-TDDS to begin your truck driver or diesel tech career.
People think the job of gold judge is simple, but actually it's quite complicated. When I see the puck go in the net, I punch this button. And the red light goes on.
What a pretty look at Canton, Ohio, the Canton-Akron area on a glorious afternoon. It's about a 60-mile drive down to Cleveland, downtown, where the new stadium will be. While we have a moment, let's remind you what comes up Sunday in primetime here on The Deuce, the Women's World Cup draw and All-Star game all at once. Mia Hamm's going to lead the U.S. Women's World Cup soccer team against a team of female All-Stars from around the world, and at halftime, the draw will be taking place. Set up the brackets for the '99 Women's World Cup. That's women's soccer Sunday right here on ESPN2. Kansas City Chiefs with a team that's going to lose a player right now as the Browns make another selection.
For their 13th pick, the Browns take Pete Swanson from the Kansas City Chiefs, the tackle, played at Stanford, and the Chiefs fullback Ron George, a linebacker from Stanford.
Well, a couple of players from Stanford have been selected. Marty, you know, obviously, Pete Swanson very well. Tell us about this 24-year-old offensive player.
Mike, the young man was a defensive lineman when he was in college. We acquired him in 1996. He's a young man who I think has a chance to step in and compete. You know, he's a very bright guy, obviously, being Stanford-oriented. As you look at the young man, the only question I would have is his functional strength as he gets ready to play the game. He certainly has the size. He's a great worker, Mike. He's got a chance to come in and help Cleveland.
Functional strength, and you talk about every offensive lineman has to be able not to get pushed around at some point.
Absolutely. His jaws can attest when the pocket begins to cave in, it gets a little crowded back there, the quarterback's going to be on those offensive linemen.
Let me go ahead.
You know, the one thing, though, now you have all these coaches, lineman coaches, tight end coaches, wide receivers, backs, and strength coaches. Can he be building that strength up?
Well, I don't know that you can actually get functional strength build up. I do know this, that he is a kid that's going to give you everything that he has. I know that the Kansas City Chiefs will be disappointed in losing Pete Swanson.
Let me take your analyst hat off for a minute, and let's talk about Kansas City. Gunther Cunningham gets hired to replace you after your very successful decade. How will the transition be with Gunther taking over?
Mike, I think it'll be done quite smoothly. Gunther has been able to retain, I think, 6 coaches from the previous staff. He is a tireless worker. I call him a warrior. He's a guy that gets there at about 5 in the morning. He gets there stays very late at night. My only concern is he's got to make sure, Gunther, let's not burn yourself out.
Now, about Marty Schottenheimer. You want to get back into coaching? You're going to wait and see.
At this juncture, I have no plans to return to coaching, Mike. My intention is to try to explore opportunities outside of coaching.
Does that include the senior tour, perhaps?
Boy, if I could ever get to that, I assure you that I would never go back to coaching.
You mentioned in your press conference, I think it's really significant when you talk about head coaches and building traditions. You stayed in Kansas City for a decade. Bill Cowher, a man who you know very well, who you hired and brought into this league as a coach, he and Denny Green now have the longest NFL tenure. Is it tough to stay in one place in the current NFL for 10 years and beyond?
I think the statistics speak very, very clearly. It becomes very difficult to do that. In my view, 10 years is probably the limit. It'll be interesting to see how things unfold with Bill Cowher and Dennis Green over the next several years.
Well, we are glad that you're with us here for the next couple of days. It's been enjoyable, to say the least, and your insight has been really a breath of fresh air. Ron George was the player pulled back from the Kansas City roster, leaving Jeff Criswell, Ted Popson, and Danon Hughes unprotected. We should point out now, as you look at the player minimums that are running here on the bottom of the screen, it doesn't add up to the number of selections. The Cleveland Browns have taken 13 players, and when you see the minimums go by, it doesn't add up. It's because two players, Lanoy Jones and Jeff Bucky, who were taken, are considered restricted free agents. Without getting too complicated and getting into the nuances of the salary cap, I'll try to simply explain it. If you're a restricted free agent, you've been in the league for 3 years, you've gained certain rights as a player. Those rights include the option to get offers from elsewhere. So, you retain your rights even though the Cleveland Browns have selected you. But since you can be taken off the Browns roster with an offer from somewhere else, you don't count towards the player minimum or the salary minimum for the Browns. Even though there are players selected, it's not going to equal the number the Browns must get to for their minimum. It's confusing. We'll keep you honest on it. Gene Washington will announce the next selection by the Cleveland Browns.
With the 14th selection, the Cleveland Browns select from San Diego defensive back Jerome Williams. From Houston, the Chargers fullback tight end John Burke, who played at Virginia Tech.
So Jerome Williams, a defensive back from San Diego, is selected here by the Browns. Marty, you see these guys on a regular basis in San Diego. What about Jerome Williams?
I think what is very, very evident right now is if you had a way to measure toughness and you began to evaluate this draft, these players would all end up very, very high on the scale for toughness. I think that's what Jerome Williams brings. He's a very tough player, a very aggressive player, particularly a good tackler, and once again, we're looking at a special teams player.
You know, the one thing he does lack, though, is range. You have to have range at the safety position. That is probably the only reason, and maybe just the one reason he is on this list in the expansion draft, the lack of range at the safety position from Williams.
We talked about having the opportunity to look at some NFL teams and their offseason issues. San Diego would be right there at the top of the list. They bring in Mike Riley, who really got the franchise in Oregon State, resurrected and back going in a proper direction after so long. Now Mike Riley takes over the San Diego Chargers and has a huge issue to deal with, the quarterback issue with Ryan Leaf. Is that his first job, making sure that there's a foundation to mend fences between Ryan Leaf and the defensive players who, let's be honest, came in and said, don't start him?
No question, Mike. There have been problems in San Diego. The team has not received Ryan Leaf with open arms. And obviously his performance did not help that. And the way he responded to some negatives certainly didn't help him. But Ryan Leaf has the innate God-given talent to be a superior quarterback in the National Football League. He has to understand one thing. It is a long process. It doesn't happen overnight. And the one thing you must do is become a student of the game. Having great God-given talent doesn't always get it done. You have to be the consummate team player and have 10 other people play around you as well as you should be playing. He's got to grow up.
They've got the defense. They had the best defense in the National Football League last year, the San Diego Chargers. Speaking of teams with good defense, you know the Browns will have it. You know the Steelers will have it when they play them. There's Bill Cowher, the coach of the Steelers. We will visit with him as our coverage of the Browns expansion draft continues. A guy who knows a lot about Cleveland as a player and a coach.
First of all, I like to run the point guards, you know, do a little dribbling, like to do a lot of dishing, go to the hole. It's very rare when you see a big man my size go to the hole. Playing a little power forward, I like to box out, do a lot of screening. Mean on the pick, you know, sometimes. I run across a pick of mine, you might get a dislocated shoulder, something like that. In the paint, the painted area, that's my house. That belongs to me. When you cross that free throw line, you're in trouble. But I like to play for the sport of it. You know, I used to play football, play basketball just to stay in shape.
Huh?
Lunch is served.
You can't eat me, Putty Tat.
You're right. And you know why, my fine feathered friend?
It's not in my contract?
No, because a sandwich just isn't a sandwich without the tangy...
What's eating him?
Friday Night Fights. This week, the main event. Antonio Diaz squares up with Mauro Lucero. Also, the return of Bronco McCart, plus a Sonny Liston retrospective. Friday Night Fights, Friday at 9 on ESPN2.
The history of the Cleveland Browns includes that man as a player and as an assistant coach, Bill Cowher. After his playing days in Philadelphia, where he was special teams captain, as a matter of fact, he was a coach on Marty Schottenheimer's staff here in Cleveland, and then, of course, going to Pittsburgh as a successful head coach. So if anyone knows the rivalry between Cleveland and Pittsburgh, it's a man who's been on both sides of it. And Bill Cowher joins us now live from Pittsburgh. It's hard for a Pittsburgh Steeler guy to say, but, Coach, are you happy to see the Browns back in football?
I don't think there's any question, Mike. I mean, the tradition that's taken place there, and I think just a natural rivalry. I think one of the great rivalries, really, Pittsburgh-Cleveland, that exists. A chance to renew that is exciting.
Coach, let me ask you just a basic, simple question about the dog pound and the tradition. In terms of going places on the road, was there any tougher place yet, more exhilarating place as an opponent to come into than Municipal Stadium? And do you think it'll carry over to the new place with all the luxury suites and all the shishi things that are the NFL stadiums in 1999?
Well, judging from Canton and looking at the crowd there, I don't think a lot of things are going to change. So it may be a different stadium, but I think the atmosphere will be very much the same as it's been in the past. Rowdy, loud, and taking an affection for the opponent.
Well, let's make this a very expensive video phone call. Marty, why don't you get the opportunity to talk to your old buddy, Bill?
Bill, I want to ask you something. Is it true that you invented the term the 12th man as the 12th coverage guy in the kicking game when you were the special teams coach here in Cleveland?
I'll tell you what, I know that you gave me one prerequisite, not to run you over when I was coaching special teams. But you know what, we had some great memories up there. It really were. And I know Marty gave me my first start in the National Football League. For that, I'm always going to be endeared. But, you know, that was a special atmosphere up there. We had some great games. And now it's kind of neat, a chance to go back up there on the other side of the field again.
Well, we're going to be cheering for you from Naples, Florida, Billy.
I know you'll be enjoying yourself and probably critiquing me a little bit, too, as the season goes along.
We'll do it. Bill, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it, and continued good success with the Steelers in 1999.
Appreciate it, Mike. Thanks.
Bill Cowher joining us live from Pittsburgh as the Steelers are involved in the business end of this expansion draft, but a chance to brush off a little bit of Cleveland Browns history when Marty was here as the head coach in the late 80s, and Bill Cowher was on his staff, one of the great future coaches of the NFL. Had his start right here because of the guys seated to our right. Well, as we were talking to Bill, a selection happened, the most recent one for the Cleveland Browns. It came off the roster of the Chicago Bears, one they're very familiar with, and the selection is Marlon Forbes, a safety who is, again, one of those restricted free agents at the cap number of $429,000. Salary and player-wise, he will not count towards the minimum, but if he stays on their roster, Ron, what kind of a player will they be looking at?
Mike, he's kind of a swing player. You know, he can play both safety positions. He's not one of the real tough, aggressive players you'd like to see at the safety spot, but he's very intelligent. He can read the routes. He can read what the quarterback wants to, read the quarterback's eyes, read the blocking schemes, make up for that lack of quickness by being a smart player and reading what's happening in front of him.
Andre Collins is the pullback. Marty, if you saw the Chicago list and you were making the decisions, you may have made a player on this list as your #1 selection overall, just based on what you know of what he's done in the league. Who would that have been?
That would have been Andy Heck without question. You know, I think you have to start protecting your quarterback with a left tackle. I know that there's some concern about injuries, but here's a guy that has played every regular season game over the past several years. I think he clearly would give this team an opportunity to go ahead with left tackle.
Even if you're building with the philosophy of let's not bring in 30-year-old veterans with a $3 million cap number, you would look the other way for a left tackle?
Absolutely, I would do that. I think he is the cornerstone of your pass protection.
Mike, as we look right here, he's blocking John Randall. There are very few guys that can handle him. A good position, a good jam there. Kelvin Waldron keeping him away from the quarterback. And as Marty said, you have to have that left tackle. And I know as a quarterback, I wanted my blind side protected, the side that I couldn't see him coming from. And you always know if you have that security blanket on the left side, you can hang in the pocket. You can read downfield. And I agree wholeheartedly. As an old QB, I like to have that backside protected.
Well, free agency will be where Dwight Clark, Chris Palmer and company will find the left tackle to protect whoever their quarterback will be. Time for a 16th selection for the Cleveland Browns.
With the 16th selection, the Cleveland Browns select from Denver, Justin Armour, wide receiver from Stanford. The Broncos pull back defensive back Darian Gordon from Stanford.
Well, there's a little bit of a reaction to Darian Gordon, who some people thought would be one of the Browns' reasons to spend a lot of money, and we'll get into Darian Gordon momentarily, but I think Justin Armour, who in that draft room do you think made that pick, guys?
I think it's clearly a selection by Dwight Clark. I think he envisions the catch once again.
Justin Armour would be that tall possession-type receiver that Dwight Clark was. Ron, what about the specifics of another ex-Stanford player?
A possession receiver can work the middle of the field, work the flanks. He is a Dwight Clark clone, as you can see here, making plays on the edges of the defense, and his height certainly is an advantage. There again, catching the ball from Elway, heading up the field, showing some running skills after the catch. And it was funny, we were sitting in the meeting room talking to Dwight Clark, and that name came up, and his eyes lit up. This was the kind of player he loves. He sees himself.
You saw some Buffalo video of Justin Armour. He had 9 starts as the third receiver for the Bills, a fourth-year player out of Stanford, a fourth-round selection of the Bills back 4 years ago, and now the possession receiver for the director of football operation Cleveland Browns, Dwight Clark, as we had discussed. Now, the player who was not selected, thus pulled back by the Denver Broncos. There's a story in that factor alone. Darian Gordon. Darian Gordon. Why would Cleveland not select a corner who's coming off, Ron, certainly his highest point in the NFL with his back-to-back 2 interception games, the AFC Championship game and the Super Bowl?
Mike, apparently there has been some rumor that his agent was demanding no less than $2.9 million to play next year. And again, we talked about the character issues here in Cleveland. They did not want to start out their franchise in contract hassles and tough contract negotiations. Ultimately, we know that's part of the game, and it will happen. But it's hard to believe a guy that played as well as he did in the Super Bowl, in the playoffs here, picking off Vinny Testaverde. Here is one of the named players in the game, an outstanding cornerback. Here as a punt returner, made plays throughout his career in San Diego and in Denver. It is kind of surprising, although because he has a low cap number, that possibly the Browns couldn't work something out to get Darian Gordon into Cleveland. But obviously, Denver was well aware of that, and they grabbed him right back.
So Darian Gordon goes back to the Broncos, and his contract status will be decided in the future. Off the Denver roster comes Justin Armour. We told you, reminding Dwight Clark of himself a little bit. We'll continue from Canton with more right after this.
Is your dandruff sending the wrong signals? Get Selsun Power. Doctors recommend Selsun Blue #1. So don't send the wrong signals. Get Selsun Power.
Are you on?
Passing through. That's all I know, really. The bottom one.
This one is mistakes.
TV Guide has come to television. Introducing the new TV Guide channel, TV Guide Online, and TV Guide Interactive. Change the way you channel.
Check out SportsCenter every night for a preview of the 1999 ESPYs, and then hit ESPN.com for a full slate of the year's nominees. See how your picks stack up against ESPN's when the awards are televised February 15th. Watch SportsCenter and log on to ESPN.com for a complete ESPY preview.
This is Jim Brown.
Let's get the gleam. All right, let's go.
Fires, end zone, Ozzie, touchdown Browns!
We welcome you back to Party Day, when we dust off the old memories of the Cleveland Browns and bring back to life the 1999 version of the Browns as the expansion draft continues from Canton, Ohio. 17th selection in this draft. Once again, here is Gene Washington of the NFL.
With the 17th selection, the Browns pick from the Washington Redskins, tackle Paul Wiggins from Oregon. The Redskins do not pull a player back.
Much like Indianapolis earlier, and if there was one team that we said yesterday would choose not to pull back anybody, it would be Washington. They'd like some of the big salaries taken off their hands. The smallest player of their 5 unprotected players in terms of salary, Paul Wiggins, an offensive tackle, is selected by the Cleveland Browns. Ron, a player who, with a androstenedione suspension, was out of the league for a few weeks earlier in the year, but talk about his playing ability.
Yeah, right, Mike. He was suspended for a short time in Pittsburgh, resurrected himself in Washington. He's one of those guys, has some natural tools. You know, he has good feet, obviously great size at 6'3", 307. But he's one of those guys that really doesn't do a good job of finishing. And in the National Football League, you have to finish a block. Once you make that initial contact, you've got to stay with them and get them on the ground, a lot like the Denver Broncos offensive line has done under Alex Gibbs. Wiggins is one of those guys, good initial contact, but doesn't finish, Mike.
If there is any team that has the salary win column of unprotected list, it's the Washington Redskins, with a couple of players in the top 3. We mentioned Andy Heck earlier. He's probably the highest offensive lineman on the list, but when you look at skill position players, Gus Frerotte and Terry Allen of Washington are up there on the list. In each case, there's a question, especially with Terry Allen. It's probably more medically related than his ability to perform and the salary situation.
I think that's the case. Terry Allen clearly is an outstanding rusher with over 1,000 yards just recent past. But I think the injuries and the accumulation of time as a running back maybe backs him off.
Hey, Ron, what about Gus Frerotte, a veteran quarterback on an expansion team, somebody who's been around the NFL, can either help tutor a Tim Couch or can lead you as a starting quarterback? Why not him?
Mike, he's been surprising to me and somewhat of an enigma. You know, I have seen him play like Sonny Jurgensen, and I've seen him play like a rookie free agent. And really, Gus has to be one of those guys that settles down into his game and lets the game come to him rather than force the action. He has a lot of trouble with pressure up the middle, but he has a lot of talent. As you can see here, he has a tendency to drift. There he had to avoid the rush, but you can see the great arm. Flicks his wrist and the ball is out. Their mobility, making plays on the perimeter, escaping the rush, getting outside. You see the tools that Gus Frerotte has. There's a play I'm sure he'd like to forget, causes him miss some time. There, throwing just a poor throw. No Redskin receiver in the area against the Giants. And in that Giant game, I could go back and I remember studying that game. Early in the game, he was phenomenal. The second half of that game, I had no idea what he was doing, throwing the ball to the Giants defensive people. But he does have ability, but he's got to settle himself down.
The interception on the zone blitz comes to mind right away in a game the Redskins fell apart in the second half.
Michael Strahan, a defensive end, pulling out, covering a tight end across. What does he do? Gus doesn't see him, throws the ball anyway, gets it picked off. You can't make those mistakes as a veteran quarterback.
That's just poor fundamental quarterbacking.
Yeah, here we go again.
Can I do a playbook now? I know what I'm supposed
Let's go back to the snap, Mike.
So with the Washington situation dealt with and them not pulling any players back, let's see which team will next have a player taken off its roster.
With the 18th pick, the Browns select from the Minnesota Vikings defensive back Dwayne Butler from Illinois State. The Vikings pull back Todd Bowman, quarterback from St. Cloud State.
There are a total of 8 quarterbacks on the list. Gus Frerotte, Heath Schuler, Glenn Foley among them. Bowman's one that's pulled back. The player selected is Dwayne Butler, for the most part a special teamer.
Yeah, but he's a good prospect as a young safety. You know, they can compete for that third position. Good size, pretty good range, you know, good speed, can make some plays. But I tell you, we're talking about Butler. What surprised me, Mike, they pulled Bowman back, who in effect was their fourth quarterback. So obviously the Minnesota Vikings must have great confidence. They have a quarterback of the future in Todd Bowman.
Jay Fiedler, who was their number 3 quarterback, still left unprotected. Marty, if you look at these expansion lists, the 5 unprotected lists per team, if you rank them on ability and future upside, Minnesota's list would be way up there, wouldn't they?
I don't think there's any question about it. They've got a group of players here that could help most any team, and certainly an expansion team right now.
There is the list that includes Jay Fiedler, who, remember, when Randall Cunningham went down midseason, there was thought for 5 days that Fiedler was going to end up being the quarterback who started. The young man out of Dartmouth. Dixon Edwards has a very high cap number. Orlando Bobo, the other players still out there on the list. Well, we're talking about quarterbacks the last few moments. Sal Palantonio standing by with one of great accomplishment.
Michael, there's no bigger legend in Cleveland than Bernie Kosar. Bernie, you can't even move around here to get mobbed for autographs. It's got to be such an exciting day.
Yeah, unbelievably exciting day. I mean, to be out there, seeing the fans, seeing how excited they are, the adrenaline rush that you got when you walk out onto the floor there and you see all the people dressed in their Browns outfits, the dog mask, the dog bones, and all of that. It's special. I mean, this is. Someone asked me, they said the Browns have been gone for 3 years. You know, does it seem like that long? I say, I think it seems like a lot longer. And to start laying the foundation today to get things started, to see the excitement of the fans, it's special.
Besides Goodwill Ambassador, what will your role be with this team?
Well, right now, today, it's fighting through the crowd here and enjoying the crowd, and we're really reflecting on the excitement of and tradition we've had and having fun. Right now, though, I mean, any way that Coach needs help with me, Dwight, Carmen, Mr. Lerner, I'm happy to help. I mean, this is part of we're in good hands here in Cleveland. We've got a great core nucleus, and I think we're really blessed to have people like Al Lerner and Carmen Policy run the show, and have Chris Palmer, who is, I think, done an outstanding job being an assistant coach in the league. And after spending some time with him last week and a few minutes today, you could see that I think he's going to be a special leader of our team.
Real quick, Tim Couch is your pick for the first pick for the Cleveland Browns?
Absolutely not. I'm coming back and playing, and Tim doesn't need it. No, you know, it's honestly though, it's early with that. Laying the foundation today here, doing this draft. Free agent period starts on Friday. The combines are February 18th through the 22nd. You really need to be ready for this today, and the free agent period starting next week, and then we'll have time to get ready for the draft.
Thanks, Bernie. He's only 35 years old, Michael. With Vinny Testaverde, Doug Flutie, why not? Bernie Kosar come back.
Hey, he'd actually bring down the average of the Pro Bowl quarterbacks this year. Chris Spielman's bar here in the Canton-Akron area, every way along I-77 between here and Cleveland. They are celebrating. It's a holiday in Ohio. The Browns are really back.
You change your oil every 3,000 miles, right? No, do you? You push it. Now you're so busy you try to squeeze another 1,000 miles out of your oil. Or more. Well, squeeze this. Mr. Do-It-Yourself when you have the time. Reformulated Quaker State. Protection beyond 3,000 miles under any driving conditions. Anybody say insurance? It's been tested. And unlike that lazy uncle nobody really likes to talk about, it works. So go get some.
As soon as I came here, I knew instantly. I could just tell how I felt here and around everybody here. It surprised me. You might as well give everything one chance. And I mean, everything here will impress anybody that comes, I think.
What would you say?
I would just say, come visit. I mean, really, what do they have better to do? Just come visit for a day and they'll see. I hope they feel comfortable. I think that that's important. If they come and they're comfortable with everything, I think that's the most important. A comfortable feeling, a welcoming feeling.
If you've been injured, it can be an overwhelming and frightening experience. We have 20 years of experience in representing people. We've chosen to represent people, not insurance companies. We're not afraid to take on insurance companies. They have lawyers that protect their rights and are on their side. You deserve a lawyer to be on your side.
At 5.9 APR on new Valkyries.
local viewers, this traffic update, I-77 moving free and clear both ways. We thank the Goodyear blimp Spirit of Akron, based right nearby here in Canton. Suffield, Ohio is the real home. Spirit floating overhead, helping us here on the Deuce, covering the NFL return to the Northeast Ohio area. The Browns have taken 18 players, 15 of them counting towards their league-mandated minimum. 3 of the players restricted free agents, not counting in the players selected or the money spent column. Per selection, an average of $500,000. 25 years old, 3 years experience. Let's see if the next one fits the profile. Here's G.
With the 19th selection, the Browns pick wide receiver Fred Brock from the Arizona Cardinals out of Southern Mississippi. The Cardinals pull back Jarius Hayes, tight end from Northern Alabama.
If you weren't with us earlier, there you see Jim Pine and Gibson from Cincinnati and Rayburg and McCormick, some of the early players selected in this expansion draft. And a potential future Browns teammate is Fred Brock, Marty, a young wide receiver off the Arizona roster.
This young man really is a kid that hasn't had much of an opportunity to play. He's got very good hands. He's got very good quickness. I think that we're looking at a player here right now who is probably going to challenge to be a 4th or 5th in Cleveland.
Small, fast wide receiver on a practice squad a year ago during his collegiate days. Only 11 touchdowns at Southern Miss, but part of a passing-oriented offense. So Fred Brock is the latest selection for the Cleveland Browns. Well, overall, as we look at what the Browns have done, for those of you who may just be coming in from work and catching up with the Browns expansion draft, really the big splash of the Cleveland Browns back into the National Football League, they've made a total of 19 selections. And other than Jim Pine, their very first pick, the offensive lineman, most recently of Detroit, before that of Tampa Bay, everyone else has been a player under $1 million. It includes leaving some of the big-ticket wide receivers and quarterbacks and running backs out there and not taking them. One of the reasons they're not doing that is because those players, Jaws, can be satisfied in free agency. On Friday, the unrestricted free agency period begins, and that's when all this cap room that the Browns are saving up can really be put to biggest bang for your buck on the field.
Yeah, no question, Mike. When you look at what they're trying to do now, they're trying to get 5 to 7 starters out of this group. And when the free agency starts on Friday, that's when they will try to get the impact players. You can see the wide receivers that will be available. There are some darn good ones in there. You can see Sean Dawkins, Antonio Freeman, Charles Johnson, Rob Moore, Carl Pickens, everyone interested in, Leslie Shepard, J.J. Stokes. This is a top group of wide receivers. Now, if you look at Cleveland, they don't get anyone in this draft that they feel to be a starter. There's a group right there where they can spend their dollars. It looks like they're saving money now to spend it later.
We put the little cheese wedge next to the players who are likely to get the franchise tag on them. In fact, Carl Pickens of Cincinnati already has received the franchise tag. However, his representatives are still talking trade, or allowed to talk trade with other teams. That's the same situation Cincinnati was in last year with Big Daddy Dan Wilkinson. They eventually traded to Washington. So the Bengals have used the franchise tag in a very interesting way. All right, here's the tag, but now go try to make a deal with you and your agent with other teams. Marty, that's an odd practice compared to the rest of the league, isn't it?
I think so, and I really believe what's going on here very simply is this. The young man does not want to play in Cincinnati. I think Pickens has made a statement that he'd like to go somewhere else and play. And I think at this point it would appear that the Bengals are going to afford him that opportunity.
I should point out that Carl Pickens has said, hey, I'll just sit out the year. But if Carl Pickens does sit out the year, it doesn't mean he gets that extra year and becomes an unrestricted free agent right away. You have to be on a roster for 6 games to get what is called an accrued season towards your experience. And when you get to 4 years of experience, you become an unrestricted free agent. It's a little bit confusing, but the bottom line is if you sit out, it doesn't mean you get to your free agency, your unrestricted free agency year 1 year quicker. So a wide receiver from the Arizona Cardinals selected, and earlier it was mentioned by Sal how Bernie Kosar can't go anywhere without being mobbed for autographs, and gladly Bernie's stopping to sign them. There is a true, unmistakable love affair between this franchise and the people in Northeast Ohio, much like you have in a lot of the big cities, like the Giants fans. And speaking of the Giants, they are now being notified that they have to pull back a player, because a player's been selected. That information has been transferred from the Browns through the league and the Giants to Gene Washington.
With the 20th selection, the Browns pick from the New York Giants defensive back Corey Blackwell from Massachusetts. The Giants pull back Derek Engler, center from Wisconsin.
Another young player in Corey Blackwell, a $250,000 salary, Ron. Again, a special teams driven player, a former UMass player who was an undrafted free agent, has made his way onto a roster.
Yeah, Mike, he's a good athlete, but, you know, you kind of say he's an older guy when you look, he's going to be 27. Not the kind of guy you normally see picked up. He went through the World League system. You know, he's just an overall kind of good player, but he does have some range. Did not see the field an awful lot this year. I think this is a little bit of a stretch to find a guy that might help you in the secondary.
You know, the NFL Europe players, there are a lot when you go through this expansion list of players who got that experience. The players from Kansas City who you sent over to NFL Europe, did you find that they came back in a better position to, if not challenge for a job, certainly for you to assess their true upside and ability?
Mike, I think clearly the opportunity to play in that World League affords these guys a chance to improve. The difficult thing that takes place in the preseason even is you can't get every player as many reps as you would like. If you have an opportunity to go and play and perform, to develop your skills, clearly it enhances your opportunities to be a part of the football team.
NFL Europe might not have the players that are the sexy players and grab your attention, but certainly it's become a legitimate developmental experience for the NFL. Over the years, the experience in the NFL when you came through Cleveland was the Dog Pound. Although Municipal Stadium will not be there, the Dog Pound returning to its same place in the new Brown Stadium when they get back on the field.
At John Gosser & Son Jewelers, we are extremely proud of being an official Rolex jeweler. That's why we display this sign so prominently in our store window. It assures you that you're getting an authentic Rolex and Rolex warranty, and that our dedication to excellence meets Rolex's highest standards. When you're ready to invest in a Rolex, please visit us at John Gosser & Son Jewelers, where we proudly display the official Rolex jewelry sign.
You know, the music program is great here, and it really is. Basically, I'm getting a conservatory education on the guitar at, 10% of the cost. The more that people are aware of the actual opportunities at a school, the more their minds will start working on the positive things that will happen when they're there. A lot of the people at Akron are here because they want to be here, and they've taken a lot of time and effort to be here, and it's kind of it's a different feeling, and it's kind of a good feeling. It's a different spirit,
Speed Freaks. If you want to get in the driver's seat for the Super Bowl of auto racing, you've got to call and ask for ESPN Classic. All this week, ESPN Classic is coming at you with Daytona Week. 7 smoking days of pedal-to-the-metal mayhem. It's 8 furious 500s. From the green flag to victory lane, see the greatest names in NASCAR history gunning for glory. To get pole position, pick up the phone and call 1-800-CLASSIC and get ESPN Classic today. Are you old school?
Hi, I'm Troy Aikman of the Dallas Cowboys. The NFL and the United Way this season are celebrating 25 years of working together to help our neighbors in need. Over the years, hundreds of NFL owners, coaches, and players have volunteered their time to work with United Way agencies and programs that show our caring for people in need. By working together, the NFL and the United Way are making a difference. The NFL, the United Way and you, the power of teamwork.
So glad to have you back at the Canton Civic Center. Welcome you back to the Canton Civic Center in Canton, Ohio. The next pick in the Cleveland Browns expansion draft, it's selection 21, coming off the Jacksonville roster.
With the 21st selection, the Browns pick defensive back Kevin Devine from the Jacksonville Jaguars out of the University of California. The Jaguars pull back Dion Figures, defensive back from Colorado.
Interesting pullback by the Jaguars that they will now react to on the board in the war room. Chris Palmer, going through the papers, the head coach. He is from the Jacksonville organization most recently, so certainly had intimate knowledge of this roster, including Kevin Devine, a young corner selected here by the Browns.
Yeah, Mike, the mark against him is that 5'9" height, a short guy, which doesn't help you much now with the big wide receiver in the NFL, but he has speed and he can make plays. Here you'll see him coming up, making play on the outside. You've got to be able to tackle in the National Football League. Here once again, attacking the line of scrimmage, making the play on the perimeter in the open field. Good solid tackle by a guy 5'9". And Devine also has some playing experience, which the Browns will love to have. You see him making the interception there. He has been on on the field. He has played. He will bring some experience. The only problem that I see with that type of coverage they use in Jacksonville, he plays a lot of zone. So when he has to match up against those tough physical wide receivers, he could have a tough time. But he does have the speed to make up for it.
Devine also has the experience of playing in NFL Europe and played in a couple of playoff games. Now, the pullback was interesting for Jacksonville. They've decided to take back from the players Cleveland can still select Deion Figures cornerback, which means Jose White is still available. Jose White is a player both of you thought highly of. Why, Marty?
Well, he gives you a big, strong, physical guy to sit down in the middle of the defensive front. A guy that can anchor against the run. I know that there was some inconsistency in his play, but I'll tell you what, when you want to get in that situation to stop the running game, a guy like Jose White can do it. We had a very serious interest in him a year ago.
So Jose White still remains available. The reaction from the fans you heard during our comments were the 5 Browns who were selected at the top of this expansion draft brought in here, being responded to by the fans, and Solomon Wilcox is on the floor of the Civic Center.
Thanks, Mike. Right now, I'm joined by team president Carmen Policy. Carmen, you decide to stay away from some of the big-ticket players today. Explain for me your philosophical approach to this expansion draft.
Well, first of all, the whole idea of this draft was to provide our coaching staff with the kind of nucleus it needed to get that foundation in place so that Dwight Clark and his staff, combined with Chris Palmer and the coaches, could go out there and do what they could be, where they could be most effective in terms of free agency. And I think that we've done that. They've got a solid core of young people that are going to help us not only in '99, but especially in the year 2000 and 2001.
Now you take 2 receivers in this expansion draft here today. In the free agent period, it's loaded with wide receiver talent, one that you know all too well in San Francisco, and J.J. Stokes. What can you say about some of the receivers in the free agent pool?
Well, I'm not quite permitted to talk about them by name, but we do think that the wide receiver situation is going to be well represented in free agency. And a great number of the players we're taking today, you're going to see being promoted and being highlighted in our special teams efforts during the year. I dare say that we're going to have one of the better special teams in the NFL in '99. So I think that we're building today in terms of putting down a foundation that'll be a certain solid block upon which to go from there, both with free agency and ultimately with the draft.
All right, thanks, Carmen. And Mike, there's no better architect to build a football team than Carmen Policy.
No, just look at his hand with that Super Bowl championship ring on it with all those diamonds. Next pick off the Buffalo roster.
With the 22nd selection, the Browns pick defensive back Ray Jackson from Buffalo, Colorado State. The Bills pull back Alex Van Pelt, quarterback from Pittsburgh.
And the pullback of Van Pelt gives us a natural transition to the quarterback roster for Buffalo. We'll get to that in a minute. First, the selection of Ray Jackson, the defensive back, 25 years old. Had a couple of interceptions, 3 years now in the National Football League.
Mike, he's instinctive, he's competitive. He lacks the kind of real good speed you'd like to have, but he's very quick, and he plays well in transition. In other words, when a player makes his move. Here you see him right there, falling back inside, making the interception. That's good instincts here. He gets beat quickly at the line of scrimmage, but has some speed to recover, and eventually makes the interception. Does not quit in the ball. And there's what you like to see out of a corner, going in, hitting somebody, and causing the fumble. There, just kind of playing his own, reading Steve Young, dropping inside, and making the pick. He's the kind of guy that lacks the real speed you'd like to have at the corner position, but he moves his hips real well. He makes that turn well, and that's very important. When you do get beat, that you don't stay beat, you recover. He can recover.
Former University of Pittsburgh quarterback Alex Van Pelt was taken back by the Bills. We got a former University of Pittsburgh Panther here. Marty, when you talk about the Buffalo Bills and quarterbacks, they have an intriguing dilemma. Rob Johnson is, from a salary standpoint, their quarterback of the future. Doug Flutie got them to the playoffs this year. As a coach, in being in that individual seat that is so concerned and so worrisome, as we look at what Flutie and Johnson did this year, their records and their starts, how do you think Wade Phillips approaches handling this situation in training camp?
I would have to say very simply, he has to let both of these players compete for the job. I understand that Doug Flutie had a great year. I think it's remarkable his achievement in this season. but they have made a significant financial commitment to Johnson, and I think they've got to afford him the opportunity to go out and play the game and win the game. It's going to be an interesting scenario to watch unfold, Mike.
You would open it up in camp and say, go ahead, boys, have at it, huh?
Absolutely.
That's a change of philosophy.
But how about that smile, though? Fight it out in camp.
But wait a minute. We talked about quarterback controversy. This does not create a controversy. This is competition. That's what this business is about, letting people compete. I think it's clear. You have to let these two people compete and find out which guy you think not is going to get you to the playoffs, but is going to give you the chance to win a championship.
But, Marty, don't you reward a guy like Doug Flutie for what he accomplished last year and say, hey, you're the guy, you're my quarterback. Now he's got to beat you out rather than say it's even?
It's obvious that you've been out of the game a little bit. Because it used to be, what have you done for me lately?
That's
now it has
true.
become, what will you do for me next?
All right.
Now you know why we've enjoyed the 2 days with these guys so much. This has been so much fun with football conversation. The team that kept the Buffalo Bills from winning the AFC East, the New York Jets, will have a player selected. Would it be their quarterback who's fallen out of favor, Glenn Foley, or one of the other players on their roster? 3 offensive linemen to choose from. Jets selection for Cleveland when we come back.
As the pilot flies through the night sky, the helmsman steers a course that is true. The landing signal officer checks the approach. The weather crew keeps an eye on the storm. The air traffic controller directs every move. The air boss orders a clear deck. The captain gives the final word. And the plane safely lands on board USS Enterprise. In the Navy, no journey is ever made alone. Call 1-800-USA-NAVY. Let the journey begin.
My job is to compare products. And it's not often that I'm surprised. So when Head & Shoulders went up against the leading prescription brand, I expected the prescription to be better, but it isn't. A study proves Head & Shoulders is effective against dandruff. I found out there's a microscopic fungus associated with dandruff, and Head & Shoulders helps kill it. Helps stop flakes before they even start. Not even the expensive prescription works better. You may never see flakes again. I don't.
College gave me the opportunities to do things in life I never ever dreamed about. To this day, I miss the fans, the fun, my teammates. College players today are tougher, quicker, and smarter. My advice to them, stay in school as long as you can. Become a lawyer, a doctor, go to med school, anything.
Superstar forwards Svetlana Abrasimova and the Huskies take on Mary Andrade and Old Dominion. Saturday at 2 on ESPN2.
Stay out of the pros.
In this day, talking about Browns history, and the first ever Monday Night Football game, the Cleveland Browns against the team that had won the Super Bowl a year prior, the New York Jets. The first opening kickoff was run back for a touchdown. Gary Collins, a touchdown reception. Joe Namath intercepted as the Jets lost to Cleveland 31-21, September of 1970. Now the Browns will make a selection off the roster of the team that came within a little bit of the Super Bowl this year, the Jets.
With the 23rd selection, the Browns pick guard Jim Bundren from the New York Jets out of Clemson. The Jets pull back John Hudson, center, out of Auburn.
Interest there is that the Jets leave Glenn Foley, their starting quarterback to start the season, still unprotected. Jim Bundren did not see the field this year for the Jets. 7th round pick out of Clemson, so Bundren adds to the offensive line after the Browns had taken 4 out of 5 selections in the defensive backfield. Should I read anything into the fact that Glenn Foley was left out there on the unprotected list, Ron?
I don't think so, but I'd say I'm a Glenn Foley fan. I think Glenn Foley can play, and if you look at what Cleveland's going to do and trying to do, they're probably going to go with a young quarterback. But if I would take a quarterback, it would be Glenn Foley. He's the guy that is lined up. You know, he can play the position opening day. He had a big game against the 49ers. I thought they may influence Carmen Policy a little bit and Dwight Clark. Here is him just making good throws, good decisions, hitting the receivers in stride. Glenn, played 5 years. He's been around. He's a tough guy. He'll hang in the pocket, deliver the football like he did there to Keyshawn Johnson. Here, the good touch on the pass over the cornerback for a touchdown. Again, good vision, picks out his receiver. But again, throwing into the coverage. And if there's one flaw that I saw in Glenn Foley this past season when I studied him, was not reading the coverage, forcing the football, bad decisions. He has the innate talent to be an outstanding quarterback, but you can't make bad decisions at the quarterback position. But I still believe Glenn Foley would be a good fit for the Cleveland Browns or some other team who would like to have a starting quarterback with a lot of upside.
You mentioned Glenn Foley against the San Francisco 49ers. Dwight Clark got to see that firsthand. 415 yards, 4 touchdowns week 1, but San Francisco comes back with the victory nonetheless. Quarterbacks who are out there in this expansion draft, there were 8 in total, Marty. We've talked about Gus Frerotte earlier. Heath Schuler, the other veteran on that list, to go with Glenn Foley. Your assessment of the quarterbacks and how you would have ranked them in this order?
Well, you know, I think probably Foley would have been a guy that I would have an interest in, because notwithstanding what they may do with Tim Couch in the draft, it's evident that the Browns are going to have to find a way to get a mentor, if you will, for the quarterback situation here.
It would be a natural fit, you would think, Foley or other free agents who are out there and available, a guy who could start or be the tutor, someone who could mentor Tim Couch, or let's be honest, take his lumps as a quarterback. Steve Berline served that role in the Carolina-Jacksonville days, starting first with Carolina, I should say. And look where it's happened for him. He's come back to become a starter in the league. But you do need that guy, don't you?
Yeah, Mike, that is a really tough transition, because as a quarterback, you want to come in, you want to compete, you want to be the starting quarterback. All of a sudden, you're not the starting quarterback. And a real-life example is Doug Flutie this year. He thought he was going to be the starter. They brought in Rob Johnson. Well, Doug got another chance and took advantage of it. So every quarterback wants to play, but if you can't play, if you don't win the job, you have to be the kind of guy that's unselfish and do whatever it takes to help your team win and help the starting quarterback get better.
Well, the next selection will come from the Baltimore Ravens, and that will provide great intrigue. Of course, Art Modell, 3 years ago today, went from Cleveland officially with league approval to Baltimore. And here is Gene Washington to the podium. I think the fans have a sense of the team to be involved. Go ahead, Gene.
With the 24th selection, the Browns pick guard out of Oklahoma, Ben Cavell from the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens fullback linebacker Terrell Peters out of Oklahoma.
So there is that selection. Ben Cavell goes from the old Browns franchise to the new old Browns franchise. A couple of years in the league, and he's been a starter as well, Marty.
In fact, he has, with the injuries that they sustained down there this year. He's a very interesting prospect. I think the guy has a chance to come in and certainly compete. He's a big, wide body, a little bit reminiscent of Nate Newton, if you will. He is a guy that can push and shove up inside. He's a guy that shows some instincts as far as being able to be in the right place at the right time. It's clear as they continue to select these offensive linemen that they have an interest in making something happen in that area.
Acquired via trade with the Philadelphia Eagles, so Cavell goes on this list, and you see Terrell Peters pulled back. It leaves out 2 very intriguing players who are ex-Browns who have made it through their 3 years in Baltimore and still on the roster. Michael Jackson and Stephon Moore are on high cap numbers, high age numbers as well, involved with both players. And if you go back to the list of why the Browns are selecting, or in some cases not selecting, some players, you look at those guys and say, well, they fit, whether it's cap or age, the significant issues. And you have to remind the fans, this isn't about brushing off all the old history and bring back guys for a nice big group hug. It's about winning football games.
You're darn right, Mike. That's the name of the game. Are we going to win, and when are we going to win? I think you take the risk of when you go with, you know, the Michael Jacksons, the Stephon Moores. Yes, it's wonderful. They come back to Cleveland. Everybody's happy, and they embrace them, but they're not going to help them win down the road. Hey, everyone knows the Browns will struggle year 1. Year 2, they'll be competitive. Year 3 is when they want to be in the playoffs and competing for a world championship. If you start making commitment to older players year 1, you'll never get to be a world champion. That, I believe, is the right decision, Mike.
Just a reminder, the history of the Cleveland Browns has remained the history of the Cleveland Browns. Jim Brown is still the all-time leading rusher in the history of this franchise, and so on. The Baltimore Ravens history is all brand new. But you talk about the last time the Cleveland Browns were on the football field. You remember all the memories of Art Modell. That sunny Sunday afternoon when Vinny Testaverde hit Michael Jackson, and the Cleveland Browns left the dog pound. Tony Jones and company, Larry Webster, and an emotional goodbye. The end then.
Out here and practically everywhere else, people are using 1010-9000 because it's the easy way to find a phone number.
I'll tell you why I use it, because now I don't have to remember area codes. There's too darn many, and they keep on changing.
Well, that's one good reason. Any others?
Yep. I like the 1010-9000 operators. Sure beats talking to a machine.
No area codes to remember and nice people to help you. Life is definitely getting better.
You got that right.
For once. 10-10-9000. Directory assistance for everyone in America.
Is your dandruff sending the wrong signals? Get Selsun Power. Doctors recommend Selsun Blue #1. So don't send the wrong signals. Get Selsun Power.
You know, these days, lots of deodorants are talking antibacterial protection. Fact is, every deodorant is antibacterial, so it's not about that at all. It's about whose deodorant lasts longer. High Endurance. Its 24-hour formula evaporates less quickly than the leading stick. Old Spice guarantees it, or they'll buy you a stick of yours. If you want odor protection that really lasts, High Endurance exceeds the need.
As a live picture just shy of 6 o'clock Eastern Time, skies above Canton, Ohio on an unseasonably warm 53-degree afternoon in Northeast Ohio. Yes, on February 9th, it was in the 50s. As you pull back and look at Canton, the site of the real big splash of the return of the Cleveland Browns. There have been players signed as street free agents, they're referred to, 21 of them. So there have already been players on the Browns roster, but this is the day the huge chunk gets settled in, and also the ceremonial part of the Browns being back in the National Football League. So as we continue with our coverage, we're going to take this opportunity, for those of you who may just be coming home for dinner and just turning on our ESPN2 coverage, to update you on not only what the Browns have done specifically, because that's been going on the bottom of our screen throughout our coverage, but we want to get you updated on the philosophy of the Cleveland Browns in making their, to this point, 24 selections, 20 of whom count towards their official total of minimum 30 selections here in the NFL draft. The Browns depth chart looks something like that, with Scott Rayburg, who they took earlier from the New England Patriots, Swanson from Kansas City's roster. This is where a depth chart would be of the players selected today. No quarterbacks, no running backs, no fullbacks, just an arm of the most accomplished of their wide receivers. That's the depth chart on the offensive side. Remember, it doesn't include those other street free agents, a few of whom may be starters down the line. So this is a somewhat incomplete depth chart, but it gives you an idea of what they've done just today. Irvin McCormick and Manuel from Pittsburgh, a couple of ends. Some linebackers, and Elijah Alexander, a potential starter. Kyle is listed as a linebacker, but in fact will be a deep snapper for this team. And a lot of defensive backs. Marty, 40% of the players in this draft, 150 total, offensive linemen and defensive backs. So there was volume there, but you thought there was quality there as well.
Well, I certainly did. I think basically what has happened here is they have gone to the area that has the most talent. I know there's been discussions relative to whether they've been interested in money, et cetera, for free agency, but I do think that what they've done is gone to the areas that have some quality and have some depth.
Let's go back up to Gene Washington for the next pick.
With the 25th selection, the Browns pick from the Green Bay Packers fullback Michael Blair out of Ball State. The Packers fullback Roel Preston, receiver from Mississippi.
Well, Green Bay very happy to get the opportunity to pull back Roel Preston. John Clayton give us some information on why they're so intrigued that Preston wasn't selected in the first place. Michael Blair is the man selected. What do we have here, Ron? A fullback or a halfback or a tweener?
Number one, he's a solid contributor on special teams, but he's got to learn to be more of a fullback. You can see the running instincts here. North-south runner between the tackles, good pad level, runs behind the pads, deliver the blows, always moving the ball forward. That's the key for a running back. But he was in Kansas City with Marty. He was a halfback, and it's very difficult to make the transition quickly from halfback to fullback, because number one at the fullback position, you must be a factor back. In other words, you must learn to block. And when I look at a Blair, I don't see a guy that could sink his hips and drive someone out of the hole like they have to do on those ISO bobs.
Before we get to John Clayton, you know the players, so give us a quick thought on him.
Well, basically, Michael was played in a situation that he was not real familiar or comfortable with when we had him in Kansas City. What he has now found is the opportunity to become a fullback. He's learning how to block. He's doing a better job in that area. I think as a receiver, he is pretty accomplished. It's interesting. He is now the first running back that has been selected, and he's not even a true halfback, if you will.
So, with the selection of Blair, I mentioned the implications team-wise for Green Bay. Let's bring in John Clayton once again.
Michael, apparently what was going on is that the Packers really thought that Roel Preston was going to go, because they worked out a deal just over the last 48 hours for Bill Schrader. It's a 3-year deal at $2.5 million. And while working out that deal, they told him, listen, we may have to put you back as a returner because we think we're going to lose Preston. So that's why they pulled Preston back. Another note in free agency, the Eagles are close to signing Mike Mamula to a 4-year, $12 million deal. So that'll take a defensive end off the boards in free agency that the Cleveland Browns can go for.
And John, an overstatement here, but there is not the wealth of free agent talent in the unrestricted pool that there has been in past years. Marty, I thought you characterized it very well, having to go through the experience on a regular basis. Teams are keeping the free agents they have a lot more than they did earlier in the process.
There's no question that that's happening, and I think basically it's a product of you have a player, you know his strengths, you know his weaknesses. You put this player in a position where he can perform, you understand his ability to get things done, you then can go address some other matters. I think that now is clearly the way the National Football League is going.
All right, so the Green Bay Packers lost a player most recently. I believe the Cowboys, is that correct? Are the team that's about to lose another player, and Dallas will be the first team to lose 2 players in this draft. We'll find out which Cowboy will be selected as the dog pound new era. Welcome back to Browns.
Here's my idea. Come talk to my school about technology.
That most distinguished authority in the field of technology, the idea box.
Thank you. The future of digital technology is here at Best Buy with digital recordings on camcorders and mini-disc, ultra-thin laptops, and soon HD TV will be the answer to all your...
Excuse me, you're still gonna sell video games, right?
You bet your joystick.
The future of technology at Best Buy. Now that's a great idea.
So, how's the broker biz?
Hey, my client made $2,000 on the market, and he owed it all to me.
What, did you give him some good advice?
Yeah, I meant he owed it to me. In commissions.
Who's looking out for your investments? E-Trade, the #1 rated place to invest online. Get free real-time quotes, 10 times more research, IPOs, all from $14.95. Isn't it time you looked out for #1? Call 1-800-E-TRADE-1 and see why someday we'll all invest this way.
Bob Jenkins, Ned Jarrett, Benny Parsons, Bill Weber, and Jerry Punch take you behind the scenes at Daytona. Tune in all week to ESPN, ESPN2, and ESPN News for all the flashes. And log on to ESPN.com for even more hot news. For analysis, interviews, and insight leading up to the start of NASCAR's 1999 Winston Cup season, keep your eyes peeled right here, where there's enough NASCAR action to fill the tank of any racing fan.
And not being a shill, but if you haven't been to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 5, 10, 15 years, you have to come back. The things they've done to the inside of that great building are wonderful. Well, wrap up the greatest year in sports with the greatest night in sports, the 1999 ESPY Awards. Samuel L. Jackson is your host. The tuxedos in the cleaners. Get it out this weekend. Head down to New York. We look forward to one of the great nights of the year. Terrell Davis among the NFL stars that'll be there. 7:30 Eastern, our coverage begins Monday night. The ESPY Awards from New York, live on ESPN. Mentioned the Cowboys are losing a player. Let's go back up to the podium and Gene Washington.
With the 26th selection, the Browns pick from the Dallas Cowboys defensive tackle Antonio Anderson. The Cowboys do not pull a player back.
Second player the Cowboys have lost. They leave Darryl Johnston and Billy Davis available to be picked. Now, this is some of the unknown in this draft for the guys in the war room, but Marty, you liked Antonio Anderson.
Yeah, this is an ideal pick, Marty, I think. Yeah, he's the kind of guy at 5 starts in 97, good quickness, instincts, and a lot of balance, which you need at that defensive line position.
You know, Josh, he was a player that I actually had him rated ahead of McCormick. I think he gives you the ability to put a guy on the edge and come around the corner and also create some havoc on the inside. This guy has size. He has the ability to create a push in the middle of the pocket. You see here the evidence of his strength. He is a guy that I think gives you a chance to get big push inside and even work off the edge as well.
A couple of Cowboy defensive linemen who can be significant contributors. If I remember back to our day 2 coverage of the draft 2 years ago, which is a frightening statement to say I remember any of these things, but Anderson slipped to day 2 of the draft, and they were disappointed in some regards with some of Antonio Anderson's off-the-field stuff when he was coming out of Syracuse. High potential, never yielded high performance out of that high potential. Now that he's been in the NFL, has stuck in a roster situation for a few years. Maybe Antonio Anderson's better football days are ahead. He does have great bloodlines among his relatives, cousins Keith and Stanford Jennings of NFL fame, and John Sally, the former NBA star, who had a talk show that I don't think lasted very long, but is still one of the funniest guys you'll ever find. So the Dallas Cowboys have lost a couple of players in this draft. That makes it now 26 selections by the Cleveland Browns. If you're just joining us, you need to be updated on the rules. As you see, Al Lerner, the owner, with hands in pocket, Carmen Policy chatting with Dwight Clark, and Chris Palmer seated to Dwight's left. The man seated to Dwight's right with Carmen's hand on his shoulder is Mr. Capman for the Cleveland Browns, Lal Hannigan, who is so in tune with all the specific moves going on with the financial implications of every player selected. And there is a lot of combing through things like paragraph 5 in players' contracts, etc., etc., etc. And the man in the white shirt there, Lal, is essential to what the Browns do. Let me take you through how the Browns structure works. From Shaker Heights, Ohio, Cleveland suburb, Al Lerner, a billionaire who spent the over $500 million to get the Browns with Carmen Policy as part of his group. Carmen's the president and CEO. Carmen comes along with Dwight Clark, the director of football operations from the 49ers, essentially the team GM. The front office goes down to the head coach, Chris Palmer, Joe Mack, who has been the director of player personnel here for Cleveland for a while, and Lal Hannigan, as I mentioned, in that special assistant role to Dwight Clark. But the value of Lal Hannigan, you can't underestimate. It's a lot different from the days Paul Brown ran the Cleveland Browns franchise. He didn't have to worry about salary caps and capologists and things like that. Lal Hannigan worked in the National Football League office, and this is a little the inside football business here. But Marty, to have somebody who really was there to answer a lot of the questions of teams related to the salary cap on your team, giving you cap answers, is that as huge a bonus as it seems to me?
I don't think that if you look at this situation, this may be the guy in the hierarchy that's as important as anybody. What goes on today in the National Football League as it relates to the salary cap is obviously very, very important. This guy has been there from the outset. He understands not only the rules particular to the salary cap, but the way these things are implied and put together. This guy is a very, very valuable part of the team in the front office of the Browns.
Maybe John Clayton is the only man who knows more about the salary cap than Lal. Here is the next selection now for the Cleveland Browns, 27th overall in this draft.
With the 27th selection, the Browns pick from the Minnesota Vikings guard Orlando Bobo out of Northeast Louisiana. The Vikings fullback Jay Fiedler, quarterback from Dartmouth.
Well, they had the opportunity to pull back 2 players and chose to leave Dixon Edwards still out there. Both quarterbacks have been pulled back, but the selection is the guard, Orlando Bobo. Happy birthday, Orlando. He turned 25 today, and he is now a Cleveland Brown.
Now, Mike, and he's a real big, thick-looking guard. He's a little bit raw, but, he's a guy that has a lot of upside, and that's what the Browns are looking for. And when you play behind an outstanding Minnesota Viking offensive line, you don't see the field a whole lot. But he's a guy that Brian Billick had liked in that Minnesota offense. He moves people. A big guy, can create some holes for the backs to run through, and he's kind of fitting the mold as we're seeing what the Cleveland Browns are focusing on this draft. They want offensive linemen. They want big offensive linemen. They want offensive linemen that could maul people.
So there are a couple of selections for the Browns in Orlando Bobo, and earlier they lost Butler, safety from Minnesota. We mentioned the most recent selection was Antonio Anderson, defensive lineman from Dallas. It would be nice if there was a Dallas defensive lineman in the building who would know him. Oh, there is. Hervin McCormick selected number 2 overall by the Browns, and he's standing by right now with Solomon Wilcox.
Hervin McCormick, you played the backup role in Dallas, but now you come to Cleveland. The prospects of starting has to loom large in your mind.
Oh, yeah, it's a great opportunity I've gotten to come out here and being picked the 2nd pick, so I'm looking forward to all that entails.
With the Browns taking your teammate, he's still your teammate even now, and Antonio Anderson, What can you tell us about him, and do you look forward to playing with him again here in Cleveland?
Oh, yeah, I look forward. You know, we had a friendship. We were together before. This is his third year, I believe, coming up. So that would be great. You've got company, guy you're familiar with. But he's a good player also. He's a good young player, good defensive tackle, which will be good.
Mike, and this guy, you know what? He won a Super Bowl ring, Super Bowl 30 in Dallas, and he's going to try to come here to Cleveland and do the same thing.
You got it, Solomon. Thank you very much. The Browns on the phone talking to their players they've acquired today and to a lot of people. Was that Drew Carey hanging out here? Give me a little Cleveland Rocks, will you, guy? We'll be right back.
If you've been injured, it can be an overwhelming and frightening experience. We have 20 years of experience in representing people. We've chosen to represent people, not insurance companies. We're not afraid to take on insurance companies. They have lawyers that protect their rights and are on their side. You deserve a lawyer to be on your side.
We sell pool tables part-time, and we don't handle sales and service, but we can get you a good deal if you can find a way to get it delivered. We don't have this particular table in stock, but I think we'll be getting it in 4 to 6.
At Ohio Billiards, we're not part-time, we're a full-time Brunswick pool table dealer. All we do is sell and service pool tables. We offer superior product and competitive pricing. Come in and meet the friendly staff. You can find the very best pool tables, accessories, air hockey, and more without that high pressure. Break into fun at Ohio Billiards of Belden.
Things happen with great white paper.
It's a great day for feeling your pride, and it's a great day for smiling inside. Yes, it's a great day, so throw your arms out wide. A great day for using great white. Oh, it's a great day for making your mark, and it's a great day for working till dark. It's a great day for getting that spark. Yes, it's a great day for using great white.
Great white. Make great things happen.
3 hours from now, this place will be filled with 18,000 screaming fans. And if I can take these Coors Lights, deliver them in all their frost-brewed glory, it is my name they're going to be cheering.
Dear man. Excuse me.
Two hours and 59 minutes from now.
Football history in Canton, go back to the Bulldogs and when the National Football League got started in a car dealership. Who would have ever thought that there would be 4,000 people here to watch essentially a half dozen to maximum 10 starters be selected? Talk about salary cap numbers, multi-million-dollar seat license or stadiums with seat licenses being sold, how this league has grown in the city of its roots we are today. Let's look at how, by salary cap number, which is as significant as age and ability in the league this day, how the Browns have been built. The 27 picks, and we are including in this list the restricted free agents who don't count towards the player or salary minimum. 23 players of the 27 under $500,000. Here's the next selection.
With the 28th selection, the Browns pick linebacker James Williams from the San Francisco 49ers out of Mississippi State. The 49ers do not pull back a player.
So the 49ers leave Antonio Langham and Randy Kirk out there still available to take. Earlier they took Steve Gordon, a center, with their 5th overall selection. What about James Williams? The first player, I believe, who is 30 years old, taken by the Browns.
Yeah, and he's one of those special teams players, and he could line up and kind of give you everything that he can, but he really doesn't fit the criteria as far as age is concerned when you got a guy that's 30 years old. This is probably maybe the surprise pick of the draft so far, taking someone that doesn't fit their mold right now.
And Marty speaks to familiarity. They know this guy from San Francisco.
Absolutely, and I'm sure they know exactly what they're doing when they select Williams.
Goes back to your free agency comment. Go back to the guys you know very well. Well, one thing we've become very familiar with in studying for this expansion draft is how great a job the Jacksonville Jaguars did in their expansion draft 4 years ago. Tom Coughlin, the coach of the Jaguars, kind enough to join us from Jacksonville. Tom, this is a far different circumstance because for you had the competitive nature with Carolina. Here, Cleveland is doing it all on their own. In some ways, would it have been much easier with this kind of pool just to pick yourself?
Well, there's no question about that, Mike. When we did our research,
when Cincinnati came into the league as an expansion team by themselves, they seemed to have an edge over when Seattle and Tampa came in and had to compete for that pool. So there isn't any question that it's a simpler process and a better process for Cleveland.
Coach, we showed something earlier. I think it would be great to refresh our viewers how Carolina and Jacksonville came out of that first expansion draft. And I think it's incredible that your team, of the 31 players selected, came up with 11 primary starters in the overall process, and still 3 on that roster today. Were you going in anticipating you could get that many starters out of your 31 players taken in the expansion draft?
Well, it wasn't necessarily an idea of starters. It was solid football players, and we would draft around the model that we brought forth when we came into the league. So we started out with Steve Berline. We knew that Carolina would take Steve if we weren't to take him. And then we tried to go with the offensive line, the defensive line. We did take a corner in the second pick. So there was a model that we were going to adhere to, and fortunately for us, it worked. And getting quality football players meant that we might develop and evolve, and some of those players became starters and turned over very rapidly, quite frankly, in year 2.
There are so many good feelings, I'm sure, for you. Anytime one of your coordinators goes on to become a head coach, it's a great feeling. But you were replacing both of your coordinators down there in Jacksonville this year. Dom Capers, ironically enough, your expansion counterpart with Carolina, is now your defensive coordinator. How difficult a situation is this going to be for your team going into next year, replacing Chris Palmer on the offensive side as well?
Well, I look at these things as positives, Mike. We're very proud of Dick Geron, Chris Palmer. They did an outstanding job here as our coordinators, and they've gone on to fulfill their dreams of becoming head coaches in the National Football League. So we look at it as a positive. Yes, it does force you to go through the process again, but you know, that also allows you to get involved with again the process of people in this league that are highly thought of, people that you might bring into the program that would bring new ideas and a new line of thinking. And we're very proud of the fact that Dom Capers is here. Dom will do an outstanding job with our defense, and we're in the process of trying to continue to search out this offensive position.
Dick Geron, of course, to Chicago. A last question for you, Coach. What bit of advice would you have for your old offensive coordinator, Chris Palmer, about the headaches, the struggles, and the angst associated with being the head coach of an expansion team in its very first season?
Well, you've got to have a plan, and you've got to stick to the plan regardless of what all the experts think. They look like they've put together a good idea for the expansion draft there in Cleveland. If you notice the number of offensive linemen, the defensive linemen, the special teams players, and the accent on youth, which is exactly the way that we went about it here in Jacksonville. So the plan is being adhered to, and with Chris, it's one step at a time as always, and take care of all the details.
Well, another 11-win season, the championship game in your second year, continued playoff success. Tom, this is a model that people will look at for a long time and say, you're going to build an expansion team, do it Tom Coughlin's way. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you during the offseason.
Thank you, Mike.
Tom Coughlin, head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, in as tough a situation as any head coach in the league, having to replace both of his coordinators. There's another selection for the Cleveland Browns. It's number 29 overall, and once again, Gene Washington will announce it for us.
With the 29th selection of first today, the Browns pick from the Tampa Bay Bucks, quarterback Scott Milanovich out of Maryland. The Bucks fullback Mitch Palmer, linebacker out of Colorado State.
Milanovich, a restricted free agent, will not again count towards the salary or player number minimums. What kind of a quarterback, Ron?
A solid quarterback, good arm, savvy kind of guy. He can move around a little bit at 6'3", 220. You'll see right here, fake the play action. Nice throw down the seam, just enough touch on the ball. Again, a young quarterback showing a good touch. And you'll hear with the blitz on, hang in the pocket, not getting too frenetic, then get forced out of the pocket, can make plays on the move. A must for the quarterback in today's game, and then get down and save the hit. Real nice touch on the fade route here, throwing out in the box to the outside for the touchdown. I like Scott Milanovich. He's a guy that has been in the Tampa Bay system. He's been around. He has some experience. And talking to Chris Palmer on Sunday, he feels that Milanovich is a guy that could be a starter in the NFL, hopefully for him in Cleveland. But it also sets up the situation now. If it's Tim Couch, will Milanovich accept the backup role?
Marty, one of the things you did so well as a coach, and we saw it in the NFL film stuff, is really get a great message as a communicator to a player. If you were using your 15 years of head coaching experience, know Scott Milanovich's situation being selected here, what kind of a message would you give him about being selected at this point?
First thing I'd do is I'd bring him in. I'd sit him down in front of me at the desk, and I'd say, young man, you are afforded the best opportunity you are ever going to have as a quarterback in this league. You'll begin to work with us probably beginning in April. Each and every day that passes that you fail to do the things that are going to help you become a winning performer, it's going to work against you, and it's going to work against me. Let's work together to get you to be the best player you can be.
I'm ready to put my helmet on, Mike. They got me all fired up. I thought it was the pre-Raiders speech. You know, we'd be flying out of here.
Well, Scott Milanovich will have the opportunity. Here's Sal Palantonio. Sal?
Mike, this afternoon I got a chance to talk to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they obviously are going quarterback in the draft, probably in the second round. Look for them to possibly target Sean King out of Tulane. He's obviously from St. Pete, so a local guy. And they also like Cade McNown of UCLA. Obviously, Trent Dilfer is the starter and is entrenched as the starter, but they like to get him pushed a little bit, get him some support. They still have Steve Walsh there. Walsh beat out Scott Milanovich in the preseason last year, but they really would like to take a quarterback in the second round. As far as the Cleveland Browns are concerned, one of the things that Carmen Policy really believes in is veteran leadership, and that's not a need that they have filled in this expansion draft yet. In free agency, one veteran who's out there is cornerback Carnell Lake, who's an unrestricted free agent. He could be tagged by the Pittsburgh Steelers by Friday. If he's not, that's someone that the Browns would be interested in. And before this draft is over, they might still take Antonio Langham, Mike.
All right, Sal, we will watch for that. Sal with his ear to the door in the war room, who will continue to add to the legacy of the all-time leading rusher in Cleveland Browns history, over 12,000 yards, the great Jim Brown from Syracuse. We'll continue with more of the Cleveland Browns expansion draft. The draft on the Deuce right after this.
Whenever you call, wherever you call, wherever you're calling from. Now every long-distance call on Sprint is just $0.10 a minute, including calling card calls, even calls to your personal 800 number. So whether you're at home or on your way there, now every minute of every day can be $0.10 well spent. Come live in a world created around you. Call 1-800-PIN-DROP. Sprint. Ahead.
Is your dandruff sending the wrong signals? Get Selsun Power. Doctors recommend Selsun Blue #1. So don't send the wrong signals. Get Selsun Power.
Lock the car.
How about,
Pepsi One.
we don't do 1 calorie.
We don't do 1 calorie. You'll do this. Let me help.
New Pepsi One, 1 calorie.
This tastes great.
True cola taste.
A coach is a leader, a motivator, like a big brother. A coach brings out the best in you. He shows you what it takes to succeed. He's someone you can count on. He's a friend when you need one. He's someone I'll always remember.
The NFL is proud to honor Adrian Morrell's former coach, Gary Allen Kuhio Clark of Provo, Utah, as the NFL High School Coach of the Year.
From special sections in newspapers to half-hour local television shows, it's all Browns everywhere you look in Northeast Ohio. Here's the 30th expansion draft selection.
With the 30th selection, the Browns pick defensive back Eric Stokes from Seattle out of Nebraska. The Seahawks do not pull back a player.
Which, again, if you're just joining us, is their option. So Seattle leaves Kevin Glover, veteran center, and Steve Broussard available. Earlier, they had Jason Kyle selected, a deep snapper, and now Eric Stokes, a safety. And Marty, you like this guy?
I really like this guy. If I'm involved in that draft room right now, I'm very excited about the acquisition of this young man. Here's a player who, as the season progressed this year, began to continue to make progress. He's an outstanding special teams player. He is a very tough physical guy. I'm going to make a prediction. As a strong safety, this kid is going to come in, and he's going to have a chance, at the very least, to be a second as a strong safety.
Really? His resume is black and blue. He will hit.
One of the black shirts out of that Nebraska defense that in the early 90s to mid-90s, Tom Osborne got more speed on those Nebraska defenses. You saw it in the secondary. They were able to hang with the receivers from Florida and Florida State and Miami, where they couldn't do in the past in Orange Bowls. And boy, there have been some good defensive backs in the last few years at Nebraska. Eric Stokes, one of them now, a Seattle Seahawk. The Cleveland Browns, in terms of player selection, through 30 picks, 25 of which count towards the league minimum, have taken 5 skill players. A quarterback, Milanovic, a running back, off the roster of the Green Bay Packers, and Mike Blair, 3 receivers and tight ends, 9 offensive linemen. On the defensive side, 3 men up front, 5 linebackers, and 8 defensive backs, 8 of the 30. That's nearly 27%. And when Marty and Jaws assessed the draft for us onto the NFL Tonight and SportsCenter last night, they said offensive line and secondary are the strength positions. That's where 17 of the 30 picks have come from. Still have picking to do. Canton, Ohio, on a clear, beautiful February night.
You sure? Yeah, I'm sorry too.
Honey, I tried every locksmith in the city and they won't take a check.
Consider the Visa check card. It automatically deducts from your checking account everywhere Visa's accepted, so you can get what you need.
What are you doing in there?
Nothing. And get on with life. Visa check card. It's everywhere you want to be.
As you get closer, your eyes get wider. Your heart beats faster. Your determination grows strong. This is not going to beat you. Oh, it's loud. And it's dirty. And yeah, it's big. But so are your plans. Hey, John boy, you ain't in Kansas anymore. From here on in, every day's gonna be a test. Those who pass deserve a great beer. Sam Adams, it's what's inside.
A boy who could see the future.
I want to go into space.
A father stuck in the past.
You want to get out of here so bad, then go.
A dream
Maybe I can go to college. There's nothing here for me.
that wouldn't die.
As long as you are alive on this planet, you have a choice.
I come to believe that I got it in me to be somebody in this world.
From the producer of Field of Dreams, October Sky, based on a true story, rated PG. Special sneak preview Sunday night.
Playing hard or working hard, Centrum has your nutrition covered. With Centrum, you benefit from what science is discovering about how vitamins and minerals help maintain health and strengthen immunity. Centrum, always complete from A to Zinc.
Steve Francis and the Terps won the battle at Chapel Hill. Now, Okalaja and the Heels want a little payback. A crucial matchup in the ACC. North Carolina, Maryland. Saturday at 4 on ESPN2.
Oh, the beauty of the Midwest on this February evening. Canton, Ohio, the Canton-Akron area, where sports is so deeply ingrained. And right across the border in Indiana, pretty good matchup. Tips off Super Tuesday in an hour. Purdue, the Boilermakers of Gene Katie, take on Bob Knight's Indiana Hoosiers. Then take it down to the SEC. If the field of 64 came out today, Auburn would be a #1 seed. You probably haven't seen them. Check them out tonight against Ole Miss. They battle for the lead in the SEC West. Tonight, Super Tuesday in an hour on ESPN. Also a college hoop doubleheader on the Deuce as well. Back to Gene Washington for the next pick.
With the 31st selection, the Browns pick running back Ronald Moore from the Miami Dolphins out of Pittsburgh State, that's in Kansas. The Dolphins fullback Henry Lusk, tight end out of Utah.
The old gorilla from Pittsburgh State, that is their nickname, and Ronald Moore is selected. Ronald Moore has some experience and some stats, probably more accomplishments than most of the other players taken in this draft.
Mike, as you can see, 5'10", 220, kind of a stocky runner, some good instincts, but lacks the good quickness and overall speed that you have to have in the NFL. But as you can see here, he can make some plays. There is a St. Louis Cardinal, or excuse me, an Arizona Cardinal. Well, I'm getting it all confused now.
Right,
so many changes, right? Maybe it was St. Louis, who knows? Could be long ago. But here you'll see him, the kind of guy, a stocky, powerful runner. Again, runs a little bit upright. You need to get down those pads, deliver though, but there breaks the tackle. Ron Moore has good power running instincts, more of a north-south guy, but doesn't really have the fluidity you need in the NFL to be an effective runner, carry the ball 20, 25 times a game. But he probably fits the molds as a special teams kind of guy.
Ronald Moore ran for 1,018 yards his rookie year, 780 yards after that. A very popular player during his Arizona days. Stops on the rosters with the Jets, with St. Louis, with the Rams, with Arizona. So he really screwed us up. He's in St. Louis and Arizona. He's a Ram and a Cardinal. Only had 4 carries this year in Miami. Now, this former 4th-round pick of the Phoenix Cardinals then becomes a Cleveland Brown.
Wow.
And they think this job is easy, right?
Boy, that is really travel. I'd like to know who his travel agent is.
You know, Miami brings up an interesting situation, guys, because, as we know, Jimmy Johnson was this close to resigning. In fact, did resign, then brought the resignation back. Dan Marino came in, Wayne Huizenga, the owner. And it's an interesting situation now in Miami. Here's Jimmy Johnson and Dave Wanstedt. Marty, knowing Jimmy and knowing what it takes to be a head coach in this league, is there any way you can share the job with someone?
Mike, I don't think there's any chance that they're going to share the job. Everybody understands Jimmy Johnson is in charge down there. I think the real onus will fall upon Dave Wanstedt. I know Dave, he's an outstanding football coach. He can manage this. They go all the way back to 1977, if memory serves me correctly. They've been together for 13 years. I see this only as a positive. Now, if for some reason it doesn't work out as far as their record is concerned, I don't think it has as much to do with this alliance as I do with the fact that the Miami Dolphins, once again, are playing in the most competitive division in the National Football League, the AFC East.
Most competitive, huh?
Certainly.
Interesting.
You know, Marty's my mentor, but I really believe this situation is very, very difficult. The players are going to read that there really isn't someone in charge. And I know the coach feels that Jimmy will still be in charge, but, you know, I watched that press conference and I saw that Dave Wanstedt was going to be handed some of the responsibilities of the head coach. And I think the players will see through that, and it's very difficult to serve 2 masters. How can Dave go into George Hill's defensive meeting and start talking to him and as an assistant head coach, and then Jimmy Johnson, the head coach, comes in and may say something different? I think it's going to be very, very difficult to make this thing work.
That will be an interesting thing to watch, and the April draft and so on. We'll continue to find out how they will make the best effort. Don't mistake any of us, to make it work. Can it, though? That's the question. Next pick, coming off another AFC East roster.
With the 32nd pick, the Browns pick running back Clarence Williams from Buffalo out of Florida State. The Bills pulled back Bill Conati, center from Virginia Tech.
Well, if the name Clarence Williams doesn't ring a bell, if you're a college football fan and I say Pooh Bear, then you know who we're talking about. When it got near the goal line at Florida State, Pooh Bear found the end zone. His weight has always been his biggest concern.
You know, and he has a nice combination of size and the athleticism for a big guy. You know, he's an outstanding lead blocker, and he ought to be at 265, but he does need to work on his technique. You know, he can catch the ball, and he's effective in that short area as a runner. But, you know, if you look at a guy like this, he has all the upside, and that's what this draft is about for the Browns. They want guys that have potential, upside, that are coachable, and I think Pooh Bear fits into that description, Mike.
I thought the comments of Dwight Clark were interesting when he talked about Williams. Said, he intrigues me. Need to look at him a little bit more, and that's one of the players when through the mock drafts, they made a second pass. Let's take a little closer look at what's his weight situation. Let's do some work and find out if we feel we can take a limited risk on this guy.
Well, I think at this particular point in time, he is a good risk. He has size. He's got the ability to pound the thing up inside. As we know, at Florida State, he was an outstanding inside runner. It's going to be interesting to see exactly how they incorporate him into this offense, because he is a bit of a one-dimensional player.
Pooh Bear Williams, former Florida State star, 17 touchdowns one year at Florida, or his Florida State couple of years, taken by the Cleveland Browns. Browns have made 27 picks counting towards their minimum. They must make 3 more picks, not including restricted free agents. So we'll keep an eye on their minimum numbers. As we do that, let's go over to John Clayton. John, this is a very active time for all teams in the league, regardless of this expansion draft, because the new year from a fiscal standpoint starts at midnight, 12:01 a.m. on Friday morning.
Well, and Mike, there may be some good news for the Browns as far as some free agents. Now, Jeff George, of course, is on hold right now with the Los Oakland Raiders. And what's going on with him is that they pulled back the $5 million extension on his contract, that buyback provision. So he's deciding this week if he wants to be a free agent. If Cleveland wants him, they can go get Jeff George. They can also get Kerry Collins, because Kerry Collins is not going to have the franchise tag put on him. That decision has been made now, so Kerry Collins is an option. Now, one other note around the league, too. Remember we were talking about a couple weeks ago about Mark Rippon going to San Diego? Well, on Monday, he's going to have a shoulder procedure. It's considered to be minor, but that puts the plans on Rippon going to San Diego on hold. Now, Sal Paolantonio also mentioned a little bit ago about the interest in Carnell Lake by Cleveland from Pittsburgh. Well, with the cap number coming in at $4.2 million on the franchise as a cornerback compared to the $2.7 as a safety, it looks like now the Steelers are not going to franchise him, and he will be available if the Cleveland Browns wants him as a free agent.
John, thanks. One of the players who's dealing with all this cap number stuff as well will be going in there to the Hall of Fame come summer. The all-time leader in tight end receptions, 662 catches, Ozzie Newsome. He will be inducted into the Professional Football Hall of Fame come August. Calvin Hill will introduce him, not Art Modell, on that weekend. The Browns will play the game on Monday night.
Excuse me, you're an endangered species, an American who doesn't rely on TV for all his news. Wouldn't it be great if one magazine could save you time and effort by summarizing, analyzing, even satirizing the news and the people who make it? The New Republic can. It doesn't go left or right. It goes wherever the story really lies. Liberals, conservatives, and independents all understand the New Republic's agenda. Don't have one. Instead, hold the agendas of others up to scrutiny, constructive ridicule, even approval. And politics and policy wonks aside, TNR also covers books and the arts with an edge you'll find irresistible. Sounds interesting, huh? Well, just call the 800 number on the screen, and for $19.99, you'll get 24 issues of America's best opinion magazine. You can cancel after the first issue and owe nothing. Call right now, and you'll also get the New Republic's Little Black Book, filled with the names, addresses, and phone numbers of Washington's power players, and it's free with your paid order. So subscribe today to America's most informed opinion magazine, The New Republic.
Today,
in the Atlantic Fleet,
on board USS Enterprise, character was forged. Valor was commended.
Minds were enlightened.
Lessons were learned.
Fears were conquered.
Worlds were discovered.
Honor was defined.
Courage was found.
Commitment was sealed.
Today on board USS Enterprise,
over 5,000 journeys began anew.
What did you do?
What did you do today?
Call 1-800-USA Navy. Let the journey begin.
Hey, Mr. Science, ever wonder what a hard-working engine goes through? It gets the high rev, and I drove over the mountain because it was their guts kicked out of it. With abuse like that, you don't want to take chances. This is Quaker State 4x4, a synthetic blend for hard-working engines made by guys with more college degrees than they've had dates. It's been tested. For pure maximum protection, there's nothing better. I wouldn't lie to you. They're not paying me enough. Quaker State, sensible technology. What more do you need to know?
It was 40 years ago this coming December of 1959, when the local newspaper, the Canton Repository, said, pro football needs a Hall of Fame. It's logical to have it here in Canton, where the league's roots were first established. A great view from the Goodyear Blimp, Spirit of Akron, based here in Northeast Ohio. Proud, along with the residents of this area, to welcome the Browns back to Ohio and the National Football League. The 1999 class of inductees that we'll see 6 months from this past Saturday start off with Lawrence Taylor. The question if he would go in, and in fact Lawrence was chosen by the selectors to join Eric Dickerson, the man who had the greatest single rushing season in terms of yardage in NFL history. We've already documented the Browns' record numbers. Ozzie Newsome now in the front office of the Baltimore Ravens, and then 2 pretty good offensive linemen from their day. Mack, 13 seasons and 184 games. And the old Georgia Tech, then Buffalo Bills star, Billy Shaw, in the 1960s. Marty, a teammate of yours, correct?
Teammate of mine, an outstanding player. We're delighted to see that he's been recognized for his achievement. It's very, very fitting.
While we have a moment, let's check in with Solomon Wilcott. Solomon.
Thanks, Mike. Right now, I'm joined by League President Neil Austrian. And Neil, first I got to ask you, what does it mean to the National Football League to have the Cleveland Browns back in football?
I think it's terrific, Solomon. I mean, you look at the crowd here for an expansion draft, it's unbelievable. This is one of the great storied franchises in the NFL. They come in from the Old American Conference. They win first time out against the Rams. You look at the busts here in terms of the number of players they've had in the Hall of Fame. You look at the phenomenal support that they've had from their fans over the years. I mean, this is a franchise that really deserved to stay in Cleveland. We were delighted we were able to keep the team here in Cleveland. And I think it's going to be a terrific opener when they play the Dallas Cowboys here in the Hall of Fame game.
You're right. They will play that game on August 9th in the Hall of Fame game. understand there's some changes there also.
I think the big change we're going to do is that game's going to be played in prime time on Monday night. That'll be covered on ABC. And on Saturday, we're still going to have the induction ceremony. It's going to be a lot bigger, a lot better, with a bunch of jumbotrons so the fans can really see expanded seating. So it's really going to be a much bigger weekend, which we think is going to be great for the fans.
And Mike, you hear Neil say the league is getting bigger and better. 31st franchise, the Cleveland Browns, and we'll be in number 32, either LA or Houston. Back to you, Mike.
And that'll be discussed at the next owners meeting, how the procedures for choosing the 32nd franchise will go and when they'll start playing. For now, the next pick of this new franchise. Go ahead, Gene.
With the 33rd selection, the Browns pick wide receiver Freddie Solomon from the Philadelphia Eagles out of South Carolina State. The Eagles fullback Morris Unatoa, center from Brigham Young.
What you heard were our eyebrows raised. Mr. Jaworski, a little intrigue here.
It really is, and I think it's a good pick. Freddie Solomon is a solid wide receiver, one of those guys that has some experience, good quickness on the underneath routes. It's kind of a willing competitor. You know, he'll go in and catch the football. You got to have a big heart, and this guy has it, catching the skinny post. Here a pass from Detmer going up. You know you're going to get hit when you leap. Great hands, catches the ball in the hands. You like to see that. But when you catch the ball over the middle, that tells everyone something about the type of character you have. Freddie Solomon has that character. He will do whatever it takes to catch the football. But he really doesn't have the great speed. What he has, that ability to read in the hash area, read the middle of the field, settle against the zone defenses, and create some havoc with the crossing routes. I think he's a guy that could contribute early to the Browns.
21 receptions, a touchdown this year, likely a third, fourth wide receiver, would you say, Ron?
Yeah, I think he's the third or fourth guy. The nickel back, when you go to that slot formation, he's the kind of guy that could work inside. A Wayne Corbett kind of player, and no one works the hash area better than Wayne Corbett. But Freddie Solomon will do a good job of that when he gets the opportunity.
He's a restricted free agent, Ron. $429,000 his cap number. That means he does not count toward the minimum that the Browns must achieve, whether it's in money or players. So even though they've made 33 selections, 27 count towards the minimum, and in salary they probably will not achieve the minimum of 38% of the salary cap, just under $22 million. So as our expansion draft coverage continues here from Canton, Ohio, with the Browns now making their 34th selection, we noticed that 4 of their last 5 picks have been skill positions: a quarterback, a running back, a fullback, a wide receiver, and we see some more experienced players in the league as well. You know, guys, I think when we saw everything that we're going to do, young and build, I think we need to remind everyone of 2 things. One, every player's on this list for a reason. There's something wrong or that they don't think fits into their specific team equation. And secondly, even though there are some older players, there are still some significant contributors in this league, and maybe that's why you're getting some experienced veterans taken down here. Selection order doesn't mean a darn thing if you're taking 3rd or 33rd in this draft.
There's no doubt that that's true. And as you look at this thing, very simply at this point, I think they have to go and address the issue of leadership. Never underestimate the importance of that, and I think at this point we may see them go in that direction.
Veterans, more experienced players, and get them here. And you have to remember, if you're thinking, hey, take a player and then cut him later on down the line, there's a cap implication for that. It's not as easy to come in, kick the tires, and then make a decision.
Yeah, the game has changed, Mike. You know, we now hear about the capologist and how much money there is to spend. And, you know, when I was around the league and I left 9 years ago, you didn't worry about all those things. You worried about who could play, and that was the guy that was on the field. But, you know, the coach talked about leadership, and I think it takes it to another step. Chemistry. The chemistry of a football team is so important, and I think Chris Palmer is watching this draft very closely, very particular about the types of players he brings into Cleveland. He wants guys with very good character, Mike.
We should talk about Chris Palmer for a minute, because even though he was an offensive coordinator on a team that's gone to the playoffs the last few years, people might not know Chris Palmer as well. Don't mistake his cerebral nature to say the guy is, you know, he's a boring guy. He's funny. He can be very engaging. Marty, you know him a little bit. Here's what he has done most recently. His stops along the way, working with Coughlin and Parcells the last few years. Jack Pardee in Houston before that. Your thoughts on Chris Palmer and how he's going to make that jump from coordinator to head coach?
Mike, I see Bill Parcells. I see Tom Coughlin in Chris Palmer. He has a very definite idea of what he wants to have done. He is going to draw a very, very bright line, as it were. Those players are going to understand there are things that have to get done. I felt very, very positively after a brief meeting with him. His appearance is very misleading. Yes. Behind that exterior is a very strong individual.
You know, I love the fact that he's going to stay on as the offensive coordinator and call the plays. Over the last couple of years, I've studied the Jacksonville offense, and it's one of the best designed offense in all of football. It is a timing and rhythm offense that requires precise timing between the offensive line, the quarterbacks, the backs in their pickup, and the wide receivers. The reason that offense has been successful because of teaching and because of coaching. So I'm glad to see that Chris is going to stay in the position as the coordinator, and you will see an outstanding offense here in Cleveland. It may not be immediate, but once he gets the right people in position, it will be a very good offense.
On this day of the Oscar nominations, that's 2 thumbs up from our Siskel and Ebert. The Giants are going to lose another player in this expansion draft. Earlier, they lost defensive back Corey Blackwell. We'll find out who they lose next when we come back to Canton in just a minute.
Out here and practically everywhere else, people are using 1010-9000 because it's the easy way to find a phone number.
I'll tell you why I use it, because now I don't have to remember area codes. There's too darn many, and they keep on changing.
Well, that's one good reason. Any others?
Yep, I like the 1010-9000 operators. Sure beats talking to a machine.
No area codes to remember and nice people to help you. Life is definitely getting better.
You got that right.
For once. 1010-9000. Directory assistance for everyone in America.
Is your dandruff sending the wrong signals? Get Selsun Power. Doctors recommend Selsun Blue #1. So don't send the wrong signals. Get Selsun Power.
Oh, Gene Washington, who along with Neil Austrian has been shepherding the process along, will announce the next selection for the Browns.
With the 34th selection, the Browns pick defensive back Brandon Sanders from the New York Giants out of Arizona. The Giants do not pull a player back.
Giants leaving out there Tito Wooten, defensive back, and Jerry Reynolds, a guard. So the Giants have lost a player. Again, someone with no starting experience, but on a roster for the last couple of years.
Yeah, Mike, his resume, once again, black and blue. He likes to hit, hardcore special teams player. You know, he has some good toughness. He's aggressive, and he's a competitor. And I think that's the other, fits the mold, once again, that Cleveland's trying to acquire. You see him playing on the teams here, fighting off 2, 3, even 4 guys, trying to get a piece of him. And that'll tell you about a guy right there. When you play special teams, and you can split the coverage like that, that is a lot of desire right there. Some hustle down the field. You know someone's looking for you. Someone's hunting you up. Someone wants to ear-hole you, and you still make the play. That tells you something about Sanders. Good special team player. He plays fast and has good, quick feet.
12 tackles in his 13 games last year. Free agent off the Kansas City roster. So you brought him in as an undrafted college free agent.
Exactly. We brought Brandon in. He was a very, very good special teams player for us. He had a very good chance of making our team. It frankly came down to the numbers at the safety position. He is clearly, as Ron suggested, a hardcore special teams performer.
That says a lot. You had a lot of veterans back there in your defensive backfield over the last few years. Well, what we're going to take a look at right now is not the expansion draft, but what happens, what is it, 9.5 weeks ahead? The collegiate draft. Number 1 is Cleveland. Number 2 is Philadelphia. We've been asking all day at ESPN.com, part of Go Network at Go.com, who should Cleveland select in this year's NFL draft? Tim Couch, Ricky Williams, or trade down the pick, get some value in the term of volume. Here are the results, and many of you have responded at ESPN.com. Good percentage. Over half of the 37,000 votes say Ricky Williams, the Heisman Trophy record-setting running back from Texas, instead of Tim Couch, the quarterback out of Kentucky. And a decent number, 17% say trade down the pick and get a lot of stuff in return. ESPN.com poll for what Dwight Clark and Chris Palmer and Carmen Policy and company should do with the #1 overall selection. There's another way to look at this, too. The players taken today, some will be starters, some will be contributors. They are not going to be the superstars of this franchise. Although this franchise has great tradition and has the most unique expansion setting ever, in fact, they're going to need player personality. Who's going to be the person to hang your hat on? Whose jersey are you going to sell? That's going to be Tim Couch or Ricky Williams. So even though it may be a prudent thing to trade the pick in terms of long-term development, I have the funny feeling they're going to take one of the two guys.
We are even discussing apparel value. You're talking about who we going to market. Now we are covering it all here on the expansion draft.
If we're talking cap numbers, we're being honest with people. We are down and dirty. This is good football talk today. There is a great legacy of, you look around here, and the amount of Browns paraphernalia. They're selling things when we walked in. There are expansion draft shirts. They're selling T-shirts and sweatshirts for the Dallas-Cleveland exhibition game. Marty, you lived through it. You know what it's really about.
Michael, there is nothing in the world like Cleveland Browns football fans. The dog pound, the tremendous energy that they bring to this football team produces at least 2 or 3 victories a year.
It's in large part due to your successful coaching, but you've been in 2 great places for fan support, Cleveland and Kansas City.
A very fortunate man am I in that regard.
But a lot of it has to do with you. Make no mistake. Next selection. Back to the stage. Who is it? This will be pick number 35 in the draft.
We had him as well.
Likely taken off the Cincinnati Bengals roster, we now understand. Earlier, Damon Gibson, the 4th overall selection, came off the Bengals roster.
With the 35th selection, the Browns picked defensive tackle Mike Thompson from the Cincinnati Bengals out of Wisconsin. The Bengals pull back 2 players, James Francis and Tom Timilty.
So the Bengals roster is now as scathed as it will be for the day. Here is Mike Thompson, bounced around 4 NFL camps. Had a brief look with you, Marty, right in Kansas City.
We did, and he is a pretty good player. He is a tough, overachieving type, a strong inside player.
Mike Thompson in his college career had 28 sacks, had a brief look with Green Bay as well as Kansas City. Half a sack in '98, a former Jacksonville Jaguar 4th round draft selection. That means Ronnie was taken on day 2 of the draft, and you know what that means. A good opportunity to remind you what is ahead on ESPN, and not only weekly editions of the NFL Tonight on the Deuce, but our complete, extensive, sometimes exhausting, but certainly proud and exclusive coverage of the NFL Draft. From Mr. Number 1 to Mr. Irrelevant, we have every pick covered starting Saturday, the April 7th.
I'm on ESPN.com. What I like about it is you can read about, like, pretty much every sport. You know what I really wasn't interested in until I got online was horse racing. And they had some stuff about, you know, the Breeders' Cup and the Kentucky Derby. I never thought about this, but, you know, if I lost some weight, you know, got in better shape, I might be able to be a jockey. You know, there's my professional dream right there. I mean, you know, how hard can it be? You hop on a horse and hit it with a stick, you know?
The jobs of tomorrow are here, thousands of them, waiting to be filled. But you have to know the fields they're in, and you have to have what it takes to master those fields. Because you can't get the jobs of tomorrow until you get the skills of today. Start by calling ITT Technical Institute. We'll send you an informative brochure on tomorrow's careers and what it takes to get them. Call 1-800-942-0099.
We welcome you back. Coming up at the top of the hour, RPM tonight. John Kernan and company are at Daytona, getting closer. The twin 125s are in 48 hours down at Daytona as Speed Weeks continues to kick into gear. Jeff Gordon on the pole for the Great American Race, the 500. All the news from Daytona today on RPM tonight. And then a college hoop doubleheader, Big East and A-10, starting with St. John's, West Virginia on the Deuce. Next Browns pick.
With the 36th selection, the Browns pick running back Jarris McPhail from the Detroit Lions out of East Carolina. The Lions pull back Tommy Boyd, wide receiver from Toledo.
Earlier, Detroit lost Jim Pine, the 1st overall selection, what likely is going to be the 2nd to last selection here in Jarris McPhail, another veteran with NFL experience, Ron.
Yeah, and he has good playing speed overall, but he's one of those guys that, you know, he goes down with the first hit, and that can't happen in the NFL. You got to be able to break tackles. Because of his size, I think you'll see him more operate in space, on the perimeter, getting the toss play, getting the traps inside, not the straight-ahead north-south stuff. He's a guy that uses a 3rd down receiver in your nickel packages. Also a teams player, which, again, one thing Cleveland is looking for, a guy that can play teams. But you can see the guy has good enough quickness, and the word is he has better game speed than, you know, the 40 speed that you would normally clock a guy in. And it's amazing, the time you talk to pro personnel people around the league, they talk about 40 speed on the clock, Mike, but then some guys, they get in the game, and that 40 speed gets knocked off by a 1/10 of a second or two, and I think McPhail is one of those guys. better in game speed conditions.
Out of East Carolina, Jarris McPhail selected. The Browns have taken 29 players that count towards the cap and towards the minimums, 36 players in all. So, in fact, Cleveland really only has to make one more selection. They can make more. This, in fact, could be the final Brown selection. We'll make a confirmation of that. It has been handed in. I understand the pullbacks have taken place. So let's see if this, in fact, is the last pick of the expansion draft.
This will be our last pick of the draft today, and I'd like to say thank you very, very much to the great fans here in Cleveland. With the 32nd and last pick, the Browns pick from San Francisco, defensive back Antonio Langham.
Some theater on the way out the door as they take a popular player, former Brown Antonio Langham.
Yeah, there's no question that this was kind of one for the crowd as we saw today. Antonio Langham, he can play. He's been a starter. He can get the job done. There you see him with the Browns helmet on. Was somewhat of a disappointment last year in San Francisco, but clearly, you know, knowing Carmen Policy, knowing Dwight Clark, he's a guy that they feel will fit in nicely here in Cleveland.
I think what's happened here very simply, they got one back against the 49ers.
Antonio Langham, who was a first-round pick of the Cleveland Browns 5 years ago, number 9 overall selection, this 5th year out of Alabama, gets selected. As we wrap up, give me a closing thought on what the Browns did today here, guys.
I like what they did defensively. I think Hervin McCormick is a guy that could make plays inside. I believe you have to pressure the quarterback nowadays in the NFL. Lenoy Jones is a linebacker with speed, can put pressure up the middle. So I think, as Coach Schottenheimer likes to say, you build from the inside out, right, Coach?
Well, I think that's exactly what has happened on the offensive side of the ball as well as the defensive side of the ball. The offensive line has been addressed very specifically here. Pine is the guy that will step in and help them. Bundren is a guy that may sneak up on some people. Clearly, they address working from the inside out.
Thank you. Your expertise and your